The earth yielded to Solomon Hayes's shovel with a reluctance that matched his own heart. Each thrust into the soil was deliberate, measured by the rhythm of his breathing and the weight of what he was about to bury. The New Mexico sunset painted the horizon in hues of amber and crimson, casting long shadows across the hillside that overlooked his modest ranch. A place he had once imagined would echo with children's laughter. Solomon paused, leaning on the wooden handle of the shovel. At 47, his body still carried the strength of his younger days, though his face, weathered by sun and sorrow, told a different story. The lines etched around his eyes had deepened over the past 3 years, carved by grief rather than time. His once dark hair now bore streaks of silver at the temples, like badges of the battles he had fought and lost. The hole was deep enough now, not as deep as a proper grave. This wasn't a burial in the traditional sense. Solomon knelt beside the freshly turned earth and gently placed a small wooden box into the hollow. His calloused fingers lingered on the smooth cedar surface, reluctant to let go of what lay inside a child's handkerchief, embroidered with the initials TH. A folded piece of paper bearing the words "A Father's Promise" in his own careful script, and a tarnished Union Army Medical Corps badge. "I should have saved you," he whispered to the box, to the memories it contained. "Both of you." The wind carried his words away across the vast expanse of territory that stretched beyond his land, a place still finding its identity 3 years after the war had ended. New Mexico Territory, 1868, caught between the old ways of frontier justice and the emerging rule of law, much like Solomon himself, was caught between his past and whatever future might await him. He covered the box with soil, each handful of earth a quiet apology. This ritual wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to carry his memories differently. The smallpox epidemic that had swept through after the war had taken his wife Elizabeth and both their children, Thomas and Sarah, within a week of each other. As a former Union Army surgeon, the irony cut deeper than any battlefield wound. He had saved countless soldiers, only to watch helpless as disease claimed his own family. When the mound was complete, Solomon stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. He didn't mark the spot with a cross or stone. This wasn't their final resting place. Their bodies lay in the proper cemetery in town. This was something more private, a place to bury his failure, and perhaps, someday, his guilt. The horizon had swallowed most of the sun by the time Solomon made his way down the hill toward his ranch house. The 2-story structure stood solid against the backdrop of cottonwood trees, lantern light already glowing in one window where Eleanor Miller, his neighbor and friend, had promised to prepare a meal. Solomon appreciated her kindness, but dreaded the inevitable gentle questions about how he was faring. 3 years had passed, and the town expected him to move forward to rejoin the living. He had almost reached the barn when the sounds drifted to him from the direction of Hargrove's Saloon, a ramshackle establishment that had sprung up near the crossroads a quarter-mile from his property. A sharp crack split the evening air, followed by a child's cry sounds that stood out against the usual cacophony of drunken laughter and tinny piano music. Solomon stopped, his body tensing, as the crack came again, unmistakably the sound of a whip meeting flesh. The cry that followed was higher this time, younger, a little girl's voice. Something cold and fierce awakened in Solomon's chest. Before he had fully formed the thought to intervene, his legs were already carrying him toward the saloon, each stride lengthening with purpose. He rounded the corner of the building to the back lot, where a scene from his nightmares unfolded in the fading light. A man stood swaying, silhouetted against the dim glow spilling from the saloon's back door. His right arm was raised, a whip dangling from his fist, like a snake ready to strike. Before him, a boy of perhaps 10 stood with his arms spread protectively in front of a smaller figure, a little girl cowering in the dirt. her dress torn and dirty. The boy's shirt hung in tatters, revealing angry red welts across his back. "I told you to fetch the horses proper." The man slurred his voice thick with whiskey and rage. "Worthless both of you, just like your ma and pa." The whip rose again. Solomon moved without hesitation, covering the distance in 3 long strides. His hand caught the man's wrist in mid-swing, applying just enough pressure to the tendons to make the fingers release their grip on the whip. "That's enough," Solomon said, his voice low and steady, the same tone he had used to calm wounded soldiers during amputations. The drunk staggered back a step, squinting up at Solomon with bloodshot eyes. "Who asked you?" Solomon didn't release the man's wrist. Instead, he studied him more carefully, mid-40s, unshaven, wearing clothes that had once been decent, but now carried the permanent stains of neglect. The stench of cheap whiskey hung around him like a cloud. "These children yours?" Solomon asked, already suspecting the answer. The man spat in the dirt. "Government says they are. Orphans from that Apache raid last year. Taking 'em in gets me the stipend." He tried to pull his arm free, but Solomon held firm. "Let go, Doc. This ain't your business." Solomon was momentarily surprised at being recognized, then remembered the man Harlan Reed, a drifter who had settled in the area after the war, known for spending most of his government pension on liquor. Solomon shifted his gaze to the children. The boy still stood protectively in front of his sister, his thin chest heaving with each breath, eyes watchful and wary. The girl peering around her brother's legs couldn't have been more than 6. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes, large and startlingly blue, held Solomon's gaze with an intensity that stirred something forgotten in his heart. "Sell them to me." Solomon said the words emerging before he had fully considered them. Reed blinked slowly, processing. "What? You heard me. You get money for whiskey. They get a roof that doesn't leak and meals that come regular." Solomon finally released the man's wrist. $20 for both. Reed rubbed his wrist, glaring at Solomon with newfound calculation in his eyes. They're worth more than that. Government gives me $15 a month for their keep." "Which you drink away within a week," Solomon countered. $30 then, cash in hand tonight. More than you'd see in 2 months of keeping them, and without the trouble of having to feed them. Reed's eyes narrowed as he weighed the immediate gratification against the longer-term benefit. Solomon knew which would win before Reed spoke again. $40, the man countered. $35, Solomon replied. "And I won't mention to Sheriff Ward how you've been treating them." Reed's face darkened at the mention of the sheriff, then relaxed into a sour grin. "Fine. 35 it is. You're doing me a favor, Doc. Boy's useless with the horses, and the girl cries all night, probably simple in the head." Solomon counted out the bills from the leather wallet he carried, placing them directly into Reed's palm. The man snatched the money, stuffing it into his vest pocket, before turning back toward the saloon's rear entrance. "No papers or nothing," Reed called over his shoulder. "They're yours now. Their ma and pa were killed by Apaches near Fort Selden. Whitaker was their name, I think. Or Walker. Something with a dodo." He waved a dismissive hand and disappeared into the saloon. Solomon turned to face the children, who had not moved during the transaction. The boy's face was a mask of suspicion and fear, his body still positioned to protect his sister. "My name is Solomon Hayes," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I have a ranch just up the road. There's food there, and clean beds." He hesitated, then added, "I was a doctor during the war. I can tend to those wounds on your back." The boy said nothing, but his eyes flicked briefly to his sister, then back to Solomon. "What's your name, son?" Solomon asked. A long silence stretched between them before the boy finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse, or perhaps from crying. "Jessie. And she's Emma." Solomon nodded, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Jessie and Emma. I'm pleased to meet you both, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He gestured toward the road. "My wagon is hitched near the front. Can you walk, Emma, or would you like me to carry you?" The little girl shrank back further behind her brother, shaking her head violently. "She doesn't talk much," Jessie said, "and she can walk. We both can." Solomon nodded again. "All right, then. Follow me and we'll get you both something to eat." He turned and began walking slowly toward the front of the saloon, listening carefully for the sound of footsteps behind him. After a moment's hesitation, he heard the soft shuffle of the children following at a distance. He didn't look back, giving them the space to retreat if they chose. But when he reached his wagon and finally turned, they were there, two small, battered figures standing in the dust, illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. Solomon helped them into the wagon bed, noting how Jessie winced when his back touched the wooden planks. The boy arranged himself so that he sat between Solomon and his sister, a small but deliberate barrier. Solomon didn't comment on this, simply took up the reins and clicked to the horses. The short journey to the ranch passed in silence. When they arrived, Eleanor Miller was standing on the porch, her expression shifting from welcome to concern as she took in the two small figures huddled in the wagon. "Solomon," she called, hurrying down the steps. "What's all this?" Solomon helped Emma down from the wagon, while Jessie clambered out on his own, staying close to his sister's side. "Eleanor, these are Jessie and Emma. They'll be staying with me." "Jessie! Emma! This is Mrs. Miller, my neighbor." Eleanor's eyes widened, then softened as she took in the children's condition. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "you're just in time for supper. I've made more than enough stew." Inside the ranch house was warm and smelled of cooking. Solomon noted how both children's eyes darted around the main room, taking in the solid furniture, the bookshelves, the large fireplace where a small fire crackled. They moved as a unit, Jessie's hand firmly gripping his sister's, their backs never to a door or window. "Let me see to those wounds first," Solomon said, gesturing toward a door off the main room. "My surgery is through there." Jessie shook his head. "Emma first." Solomon nodded, understanding the protective instinct. "All right, Emma can come with us, and I'll check her over first." The small room that had once been Solomon's pride was meticulously organized, with the examination table cabinets of medicines and instruments and a wash basin with clean towels. He had brought the best of his medical equipment home after the war, imagining a country practice that never quite materialized, as grief consumed him. Emma allowed herself to be lifted onto the table, though she kept a death grip on her brother's hand. Solomon checked her for injuries, finding mostly superficial scrapes and bruises, though signs of long-term neglect were evident in her thin frame and the dullness of her hair. "She seems to be all right physically," Solomon told Jessie, "though she could use some regular meals." He turned to Jessie. "Now, let me see your back, son." Reluctantly, Jessie let Solomon help him remove what remained of his shirt. Solomon's jaw tightened at the sight. 6 or 7 angry welts crossed the boy's back, 2 of which had broken the skin. Old scars beneath the fresh wounds told a story of ongoing abuse. "This will sting," Solomon warned as he began cleaning the wounds with a mild antiseptic solution. Jessie didn't flinch, though Solomon could feel the tension in the boy's muscles. As he worked, Solomon's gaze was drawn to a mark on Jessie's right shoulder, a distinctive crescent-shaped scar, old and white, against the boy's tanned skin. Something about its shape triggered a memory that Solomon couldn't immediately place. "How did you get this scar?" he asked, his fingers hovering above the mark. Jessie shrugged. Always had it. Ma said I was born with it. Solomon completed his ministrations in silence, applying a soothing salve and light bandages where needed. As he worked, Emma watched with solemn intensity from her perch on a nearby stool. Once, when Jesse winced, despite himself, she reached out and touched her brother's hand, the first independent movement Solomon had seen from her. "There," Solomon said, finally, helping Jesse into one of Thomas's old shirts, kept in a chest he hadn't been able to part with. The garment was too large for Jesse's thin frame, but it was clean and soft with washing. "Now, let's see about that supper Mrs. Miller has prepared." The meal was a quiet affair. Both children ate with the controlled desperation of those accustomed to food scarcity, careful not to appear too eager, but cleaning their plates completely. Solomon noticed how Jesse subtly pushed extra portions toward his sister when he thought no one was watching. After supper, Solomon showed them to a bedroom on the second floor, the one that had been prepared for guests, not the rooms that had belonged to Thomas and Sarah. Those doors remained closed, the spaces beyond preserved like shrines to what had been lost. "You'll both sleep here tonight," Solomon said, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. "The washroom is down the hall. There's clean water in the pitcher and towels on the rack." Jesse nodded, still holding his sister's hand. Emma's eyes were growing heavy, despite her obvious efforts to stay alert. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," Solomon added. "My room is at the end of the hall, but I don't sleep much these days." He left them, then closing the door softly behind him. Downstairs, Eleanor was washing the supper dishes, her back to him as he entered the kitchen. "Those children have been through hell, Solomon," she said without turning. "What possessed you to bring them here?" Solomon sank into a chair at the kitchen table, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt. "I couldn't leave them there, Eleanor. Not with that drunk." She turned and then, drying her hands on her apron. "Of course not. But have you thought about what comes next? You've been a ghost in this house for 3 years. And now, suddenly, you're responsible for 2 traumatized children." "I was a father once," Solomon said quietly. "I remember how." Eleanor's expression softened. She crossed to the table and sat across from him, reaching for his hand. "Yes, you were. A good one. But these aren't your children, Solomon. They're not Thomas and Sarah." "I know that," he replied more sharply than he intended. Then softer, "I know." Eleanor sighed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. It's just, I worry about you. And now I'll worry about them, too." She squeezed his hand. "But perhaps this is what you need. All of you." After Eleanor left, Solomon sat alone in the quiet house, listening to the occasional creaks and settling sounds of the old timber frame. Once he thought he heard the soft pad of footsteps upstairs, followed by whispers, but they soon subsided. Unable to face his own empty bed, Solomon settled into the armchair by the fireplace, a worn copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass, open but unread, on his lap. His thoughts kept returning to the crescent-shaped scar on Jesse's shoulder and why it seemed so familiar. Sleep must have claimed him eventually, for he woke with a start at the sound of a cry from upstairs. Solomon was on his feet and moving before he was fully awake, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The cry came again as he reached the children's door. Emma's voice high and frightened. "Thomas! Thomas! Where are you?" Solomon froze his hand on the doorknob. Thomas. His son's name. He pushed the door open slowly. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the bed where Emma thrashed in the grip of a nightmare. Jesse was already awake, trying to calm his sister, whispering reassurances. "It's okay, Em. It's just a dream. I'm here." Solomon approached the bed cautiously. "Is she all right?" Jesse looked up, his face pale in the moonlight. She gets these sometimes. Bad dreams. Solomon sat on the edge of the bed. Emma, he said softly. Emma, you're safe now. The little girl's eyes flew open, unfocused at first, then settling on Solomon's face. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in her expression. Then fear replaced it, and she shrank against her brother. It's okay, Jesse told her. Remember, we're at the doctor's house now, away from Harlan. Emma nodded, her breathing gradually slowing. Her gaze remained fixed on Solomon, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Would you like some water? Solomon asked her. To his surprise, she nodded. He went to the pitcher on the washstand and poured a cup, bringing it back to the bed. Emma took it with both hands, drinking deeply, before returning the cup. Thank you, she whispered, the first words he had heard her speak. You're welcome, Solomon replied, equally soft. Try to sleep now. You're safe here. As he rose to leave, Emma spoke again, her voice small but clear in the quiet room. Are you Thomas's father? Solomon felt the floor tilt beneath him. He steadied himself against the bedpost. What did you say? Emma's eyes were already drooping, exhaustion reclaiming her. In my dream, she murmured. Thomas said his father would come. Jesse laid a protective arm across his sister. She doesn't know what she's saying. It's just the nightmare talking. Solomon nodded, not trusting his voice. He retreated from the room, pulling the door closed behind him, then leaned against the wall in the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest. Thomas. How could Emma know that name? Reed had mentioned their surname, Whitaker or Walker, but not their given names, and not his son's name. Solomon made his way back downstairs in a daze, drawn to the chest in the corner of his study, where he kept the few mementos he hadn't been able to part with. With trembling hands, he unlocked it and lifted the lid. On top lay a small daguerreotype in a silver frame, his family taken 6 months before the epidemic. Elizabeth seated with Sarah on her lap, and Thomas standing beside them, Solomon's hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Thomas had been 10 when the photograph was taken, the same age Jesse appeared to be now. Solomon studied his son's face in the image, then closed his eyes, conjuring Jesse's features in his mind. There was no resemblance, not really. Thomas had been fair-haired and round-faced, while Jesse was dark and lean, his features sharpened by hardship. And yet. Solomon set the photograph aside and reached deeper into the chest, searching for another item, a small journal bound in worn leather. Elizabeth had kept meticulous records of the children's growth, illnesses, and milestones. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, an entry from shortly after Thomas's birth. The midwife says the mark on his shoulder is a moon blessing, Elizabeth had written, a crescent shape just below his right collarbone. She says children born with such marks are special, touched by Providence. Solomon closed the journal, his mind racing. The mark on Jesse's shoulder, the same crescent shape in the same location. It could be coincidence. It had to be coincidence. And yet Emma had called out for Thomas in her sleep. Solomon returned the items to the chest and locked it, then moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. The rational part of his mind, the surgeon, the man of science, rejected the notion forming in the shadows of his thoughts. People didn't return from death. Souls didn't transmigrate into new bodies. And yet the ache in his chest, the one that had been his constant companion for 3 years, felt different somehow. Not gone, but altered. As if the universe had shifted slightly on its axis, opening a possibility he had never considered. Solomon shook his head, dismissing the foolish thoughts. The children were traumatized, and he was projecting his own grief onto them. Nothing more. He returned to the armchair by the now cold fireplace and waited for dawn, writing in the journal he kept letters to his dead children, a ritual that helped him feel connected to what he had lost. Tonight, for the first time, he found himself writing about Jesse and Emma, describing their arrival and his strange reaction to them. "I don't know if I'm helping them or using them," he wrote. "Perhaps both. But I think you would have liked them, Thomas. You and Sarah both." Dawn arrived with the sound of movement in the kitchen. Solomon rose stiffly from the chair, his body protesting the night spent upright. The smell of coffee drew him toward the back of the house. To his surprise, Jesse stood at the stove, carefully tending a pot of what appeared to be oatmeal. The boy looked up as Solomon entered, his expression guarded. "Found the oats in the pantry," he said. "Hope that's all right." Solomon nodded. "More than all right. I'm impressed you know your way around a kitchen." Jesse shrugged. "Ma taught me before. Then I had to teach Emma." Solomon poured himself a cup of the coffee Jesse had brewed. It was strong enough to stand a spoon in the way soldiers made it in the field. "Where is Emma?" "Still sleeping," Jesse replied. "She doesn't do well after the nightmares." Solomon leaned against the counter, studying the boy over the rim of his cup. In the morning light, Jesse looked even thinner, the borrowed shirt hanging from his frame like a sail without wind. But there was strength in the set of his shoulders and intelligence in his dark eyes. "She called for Thomas last night," Solomon said carefully. "That was my son's name." Jesse's hand stilled momentarily as he stirred the oatmeal. "Like I said, she says strange things sometimes. After our parents died," he trailed off, then continued with forced casualness. "We've moved around a lot. Harlan was the third person who took us in. The others didn't keep us long." "Why not?" Solomon asked. Jesse met his gaze directly for the first time. "People think Emma's touched in the head because she doesn't talk much, or because of the things she says when she does. But she's not. She's smart. She just sees things differently." Solomon nodded, understanding more than the boy might realize. "My Sarah was like that too. Quiet, but noticing everything. People often mistake silence for simplicity." A flicker of something relief perhaps crossed Jesse's face before the guarded expression returned. "How long are we staying?" he asked bluntly. The question caught Solomon off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "But you're welcome to stay as long as you need to, until we figure out something more permanent." Jesse nodded, turning back to the oatmeal. "It's ready," he said. "Should I take some up to Emma?" "Let her sleep," Solomon suggested. "There will be plenty when she wakes." They ate in companionable silence, Jesse methodically working his way through 2 bowls of oatmeal, while Solomon watched, pleased to see the boy's appetite. When they finished, Solomon stood and gestured toward the door. "I need to check the fences on the north pasture today. Would you like to come along? Or would you rather stay here with your sister?" Jesse hesitated, clearly torn. "I should stay with Emma. She gets scared in new places." Solomon nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Miller will be coming by later to bring some clothes that might fit you both better. She has grandchildren about your age." Jesse's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're not charity cases." "No," Solomon agreed. "You're not. But you need clothes, and Mrs. Miller has some to spare. That's neighbors helping neighbors, not charity." The boy seemed to accept this distinction, if reluctantly. "I can work," he offered. "I'm good with horses, and I can chop wood, clean whatever needs doing." Solomon regarded him thoughtfully. "I appreciate that. We'll find plenty for you to do once you've had a chance to heal up. For now, rest and eat. That's all I ask." As Solomon gathered his gear for the day's work, he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in the doorway, her small face still puffy with sleep. She wore the same dirty dress from the night before, her blonde hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. "Good morning, Emma," Solomon said gently. "Are you hungry? Jessie made oatmeal." The little girl nodded, padding across the kitchen to her brother's side. Jessie immediately began preparing a bowl for her, adding a generous spoonful of honey from the jar on the table. "I have to go check the fences," Solomon told her, "but Jessie will be here with you, and Mrs. Miller will come by later with some new clothes for you both." Emma regarded him solemnly, then spoke in a clear, quiet voice. "Will you come back?" The simple question carried a weight beyond its words, the fear of abandonment evident in the child's eyes. Solomon knelt to her level, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes, Emma, I will always come back." Something in her expression shifted, a trust beginning to form. She nodded once, then turned to the bowl of oatmeal Jessie placed before her. Solomon left them, then stepping out into the bright morning light with a strange feeling in his chest. Something like purpose, something like hope. Emotions he had thought buried alongside his family. The north pasture fence took most of the day to repair. The winter had been hard on the wooden posts, and several sections needed complete replacement. Solomon worked steadily, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the thoughts that had plagued him during the night. By mid-afternoon, sweat soaked his shirt, despite the cool spring air, and his muscles ached pleasantly with exertion. As he drove the last post into the ground, Solomon became aware of being watched. He turned to find Jessie standing a few yards away, a canteen in his hand. The boy approached cautiously, offering the water. "Mrs. Miller said to bring this to you," Jessie explained. "Said you'd forget to drink otherwise." Solomon accepted the canteen gratefully, taking a long swallow before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thank you. Eleanor knows me too well, I'm afraid." He gestured to the repaired fence. "What do you think will it hold?" Jessie studied the work with a critical eye. "The crossbeam there needs to be higher," he said, pointing. "Otherwise, the smaller calves might push through." Solomon looked where the boy indicated and saw that he was right. "Good eye," he said, genuinely impressed. "Want to help me fix it?" Jessie nodded, and for the next hour they worked side by side. Solomon adjusting the cross beam, while Jessie handed him tools and held the posts steady. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable, each finding their rhythm in the shared labor. As they gathered the tools to head back to the house, Solomon noticed Jessie staring at the hill where he had buried the box the previous evening. "What's up there?" the boy asked. Solomon followed his gaze. "Just a place I go sometimes, to think." Jessie seemed to accept this vague answer, his attention already shifting to a hawk circling overhead. They walked back to the ranch in silence, the late afternoon sun warm on their backs. Eleanor's wagon was still outside the house when they returned. Inside, they found her in the kitchen, with Emma teaching the little girl how to roll biscuit dough. Emma's face and hands were dusted with flour, but her expression was one of intense concentration as she carefully mimicked Eleanor's movements. "Well, look who's back," Eleanor said cheerfully. "Just in time for supper. Emma has been helping me, haven't you, dear?" Emma nodded, a hint of pride in her eyes as she glanced at her brother. Jessie gave her a small smile, the first Solomon had seen from him. "I brought those clothes I mentioned," Eleanor continued, gesturing to 2 bundles on the table. "And some other things I thought you might need, soap combs, that sort of thing." "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," Jessie said formally. "We appreciate your kindness." Eleanor waved away his thanks. "It's nothing. Now, why don't you two get washed up before we eat? The pump out back has the warmest water this time of day." And as the children headed outside to clean up, Eleanor turned to Solomon, her voice dropping. "That little girl hasn't said 2 words since I arrived, but she's been watching me like a hawk. Smart as a whip, that one." Solomon nodded. "Jessie says she doesn't talk much. Not since their parents died." Eleanor's expression sobered. "About that, I think I might know who they are." She hesitated, then continued. "There was a family named Whitaker that settled near Fort Selden last year. Thomas and Sarah Whitaker with their 2 children. They were killed in what everyone said was an Apache raid, but there were rumors." Solomon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "What kind of rumors?" Eleanor glanced toward the door to ensure they were still alone. "That it wasn't Apaches at all. That it was white men, former soldiers, looking for something the Whitakers had." She shook her head. "I don't know if these are the same children, but the timing fits, and the names. Thomas and Sarah. The same names as his own dead children. What happened to the Whitaker children afterward?" Solomon asked, his throat suddenly dry. "They disappeared for a while," Eleanor replied. "Then word came that they'd been taken in by a family up north. I never heard more than that." The back door opened, and Jessie and Emma returned, their faces and hands, clean hair, damp from washing. The conversation ended abruptly, but Solomon's mind continued to race. Supper passed in a blur, with Eleanor carrying most of the conversation, drawing occasional responses from Jessie and silent nods from Emma. Solomon contributed little, lost in thought about the coincidences that seemed to be piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. After Eleanor left, promising to return the next day, Solomon helped the children prepare for bed. Emma allowed him to comb the tangles from her hair, sitting patiently on a stool in front of the washroom mirror. Jessie accepted the offer of a proper bath, the first he'd had in months, by his own admission. When both children were clean and dressed in the nightclothes Eleanor had brought, Solomon escorted them to their room. Emma crawled into bed immediately, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Jessie, however, lingered by the window, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Something on your mind, son?" Solomon asked. Jessie turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why are you doing this?" he asked directly. "Taking us in, giving us food and clothes. What do you want from us?" The question was blunt but fair. Solomon considered his answer carefully. "I suppose I'm trying to keep a promise," he said finally. "Not to you or even to myself, but to my own children." Jessie's brow furrowed. "The ones who died, Thomas, and what was your daughter's name?" "Sarah," Solomon said softly. Jessie's eyes widened slightly. "That was my mother's name. Sarah." Solomon nodded, a strange tightness in his chest. "It's a common name. And Thomas was my father's name." Jessie continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They stared at each other across the darkening room, the implications hanging unspoken between them. "Get some sleep, Jessie," Solomon said finally. "We can talk more tomorrow." The boy nodded, moving reluctantly to the bed he shared with his sister. Solomon closed the door softly behind him, then stood in the hallway listening to the settling sounds of the house. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. But as he made his way downstairs to his study, Solomon couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than himself was at work. Some design he couldn't yet discern, but could feel unfolding around him like the petals of a night-blooming flower. He unlocked the chest again, this time removing a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Elizabeth's letters, written during the brief separations of their marriage. He untied the ribbon and selected one at random, his eyes finding a passage near the end. "Thomas asked me yesterday if souls can return after death like the missionaries teach. I told him what you always say, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transformed. He seemed satisfied with this, though Sarah insists that her ragdoll contains the soul of a princess. Such imagination in our children. It makes me wonder what they will become. Solomon refolded the letter, carefully returning it to its place in the chest. Then he moved to his desk and opened the bottom drawer, removing a bottle of whiskey and a single glass. He rarely drank, but tonight the weight of memory and coincidence pressed upon him like a physical presence. One glass became two as the night deepened. Solomon found himself at the window staring up at the hill where he had buried the box, his private act of memorial and penance. In the moonlight, the mound of disturbed earth was just visible, a darker shadow against the pale grass. "I'm losing my mind, Elizabeth," he whispered to the empty room. "Or perhaps I've already lost it." The sound of the front door opening jerked Solomon from his thoughts. He moved silently to the hall, peering into the darkness. A small figure stood in the open doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. Emma. She wore only her nightgown, her bare feet pale against the dark floorboards. As Solomon watched, she stepped outside onto the porch, moving with the eerie purposefulness of a sleepwalker. "Emma," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't respond, continuing down the porch steps and into the yard. Solomon followed, concern mounting, as she headed directly toward the path that led up the hill, the path to his makeshift grave. "Emma, stop," he said more firmly, quickening his pace. The little girl paused, turning to face him. Her eyes were open but unfocused, seeing something beyond the physical world around her. "He's waiting," she said, her voice distant. "Up there, with the box." Solomon felt his blood run cold. "Who is waiting, Emma?" "Thomas," she replied simply. "He says you buried his handkerchief, the one with the TH on it. He wants it back." Solomon staggered as if struck. He had told no one about the contents of the box. Not even Eleanor knew what he had buried on the hillside. "Emma," he said, kneeling before her, his hands gentle on her thin shoulders. "Emma, wake up. You're dreaming." The child blinked slowly, her eyes gradually focusing on his face. Confusion replaced the distant expression. "Dr. Hayes," she whispered. "Yes, it's me," he said. "You were sleepwalking, child. Let's get you back inside before you catch cold." Emma nodded, allowing him to lift her into his arms. As he carried her back to the house, she rested her head against his shoulder, her small body warm against his chest. "I see them sometimes," she murmured, already drifting back toward sleep. "The people who are gone. They talk to me." Solomon said nothing, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. By the time he laid Emma back in her bed, she was fully asleep again, her breathing deep and regular. Jessie, to Solomon's relief, hadn't stirred. Back in his study, Solomon poured another glass of whiskey with a shaking hand. The rational explanations failed him now. Emma could not have known about the handkerchief, the initials, the box itself. Unless there was more to death and to life than his medical training had prepared him to understand. Solomon drank deeply, letting the liquor burn a path down his throat. Then he moved to his desk and opened his journal, needing to document what had just occurred while it was still fresh in his mind. As he wrote, a new thought formed, unbidden but insistent. What if the children had been sent to him, not by chance or coincidence, but by some deeper design, a second chance to keep the promise he had made to his own children as they lay dying? "I will find you again," he had whispered to Thomas and Sarah as the fever took them. "Wherever you go, I will find you." Solomon closed the journal, suddenly certain of one thing amid all the questions swirling in his mind. Whatever forces had brought Jesse and Emma to his door, he would protect them with his life. Not because they might somehow be connected to his lost children, but because they needed him now in this life, in this moment. And perhaps, in saving them, he might begin to save himself as well. The thought settled over him like a mantle, heavy, but somehow right. Solomon finally made his way to his own bed as the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. For the first time in 3 years, he slept without dreams, a deep, healing sleep that lasted until the sun was high in the morning sky. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the worn wooden floor. Solomon stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet, while coffee percolated in the pot beside it. The familiar domestic ritual felt strange after years of preparing meals only for himself, when he bothered to eat at all. Behind him, the soft scrape of chair legs against the floor announced Jesse's arrival. The boy had an innate quietness to his movements, a habitual caution that spoke of hard lessons learned early. "Morning," Solomon said without turning. "Sleep well." "Yes, sir," Jesse replied, his voice still rough with sleep. "Emma's still out. She was restless last night." Solomon nodded, keeping his attention on the bacon. He decided against mentioning Emma's sleepwalking episode. The child might be embarrassed, and Jesse protective. "Breakfast will be ready soon. There's coffee, if you'd like some." "Thank you, sir." "Solomon is fine," he corrected gently. "Or Dr. Hayes, if you prefer. But not sir." Jesse was silent for a moment. "My father was sir," he said finally. "I don't think he liked his name much." Solomon turned then, studying the boy's face. Jesse sat with perfect posture, hands folded on the table before him, eyes downcast, the stance of someone accustomed to scrutiny and swift punishment for any perceived failing. "Your father," Solomon said carefully. "Thomas Whitaker. Tell me about him." Jesse's head snapped up, wariness replacing the morning calm in his eyes. "How do you know his name?" "Mrs. Miller mentioned it yesterday," Solomon replied, "which was true enough, though not the complete truth. She knew of your family, it seems." The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly. "There's not much to tell. He was a surveyor for the government. We moved around a lot." "And your mother, Sarah?" Jesse nodded. "She taught us at home, reading writing figures. She was real smart." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "She sang all the time, even when there wasn't much to be happy about." Solomon returned to the stove, flipping the bacon onto a waiting plate and cracking eggs into the hot fat. "What brought your family to Fort Selden?" he asked, keeping his tone conversational. Jesse hesitated, and Solomon could sense the boy weighing how much to reveal. "Pa was looking for something," he said finally. "A place that was marked on a special map he had. He argued with Ma about it. Said it would change everything for us." "What kind of place?" "Don't know. Just that it was important." Jesse's voice dropped. "The night before they died, I heard Pa tell Ma they'd found it. That we'd never have to worry about money again." Solomon brought the food to the table, setting a plate before Jesse and taking the seat across from him. "You don't have to talk about this if you don't want to." Jesse shook his head. "It's all right. Been a long time now." But his eyes said otherwise, still haunted by memories no child should carry. "And after your parents died," Solomon prompted gently, "how did you end up with Harlan Reed?" "We were hidden when it happened," Jesse said, pushing eggs around his plate. "Ma put us in a root cellar under the floor. told us not to make a sound no matter what we heard." He swallowed hard. "When it was quiet, I looked out, saw them all, lying there, Pa and Ma, and the farmhands, blood everywhere." Solomon felt his chest tighten with empathy. "You protected Emma." Jesse nodded. "Kept her in the cellar till morning. Then we walked. Don't know how long. A farmer found us on the road, took us to the fort. They sent us to a family up north, but the woman got sick of Emma's nightmares. Said she was possessed. So they sent us to another place, and then to Harlan." Solomon ate in silence, allowing Jesse time to compose himself. The boy's matter-of-fact recounting of tragedy belied the depth of trauma evident in his eyes. "Harlan wasn't always so bad," Jesse continued unexpectedly. "At first he was decent enough, but then the drinking got worse, and he started getting visits from men in town. They'd ask questions about Pa's papers if we knew where they were." Solomon set down his fork. "What papers?" "Don't know exactly. Land deeds, maybe Pa kept everything in a metal box. I hid it after they died. Buried it where no one would find it." Jesse met Solomon's gaze directly. "That's why we can't go back to town much. Those men are still looking." The implications settled over Solomon like a physical weight. If Jesse's account was accurate, the Apache raid had been nothing of the sort, but rather a calculated murder to obtain valuable documents. And whoever was responsible still pursued the children, believing they might lead to the hidden papers. A soft sound from the doorway drew their attention. Emma stood there in her nightgown, blonde hair tousled from sleep-blue eyes, still heavy-lidded. "Good morning, Emma," Solomon said gently. "Are you hungry?" The little girl nodded, padding across the room to climb onto the chair beside her brother. Jesse immediately cut a portion of his bacon and transferred it to her empty plate, a gesture so automatic it clearly reflected long habit. "I can make more," Solomon offered, but Jesse shook his head. "She doesn't eat much in the mornings. This is enough." Emma said nothing, but her eyes tracked Solomon's movements as he poured her a small cup of milk and added a spoonful of honey, stirring it the way Elizabeth had done for their children when they were ill. "Sweet milk," Emma murmured, taking the cup with both hands. "My Sarah liked it that way too." Solomon said the words emerging before he could consider them. Emma's gaze sharpened, focusing on his face with unsettling intensity. "I know," she said simply, then returned her attention to the milk. Jesse shot his sister a warning look before turning to Solomon. "What chores need doing today, I can start earning our keep." Solomon recognized the deliberate change of subject, but didn't press the issue. "The barn needs sweeping and the horses could use some attention, but your back is fine," Jesse interrupted. "I've worked with worse." Solomon studied the boy, weighing his stubborn pride against medical concerns. "All right," he conceded, "but only light work today. The horses first, they could use some grooming. Tools are in the tack room." Jesse nodded and quickly finished his breakfast, eager to prove his usefulness. When he'd gone, leaving Emma still nursing her sweet milk, Solomon took the opportunity to speak with the child alone. "Emma," he began gently, "do you remember walking outside last night?" The little girl stilled her cup halfway to her lips. Then she nodded, eyes downcast. "You said something about Thomas waiting on the hill, with a box." Solomon kept his voice neutral, careful not to sound accusatory. "How did you know about that?" Emma set her cup down with deliberate care. "He told me," she whispered. "Who told you?" "Thomas." Her eyes lifted to meet his, clear and guileless. "Your Thomas. He talks to me sometimes, when I'm sleeping." Solomon felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. "What does he say to you, Emma?" The child's brow furrowed in concentration. He says, "You're sad because you think you broke your promise. But you didn't. You found us." She tilted her head as if listening to a voice only she could hear. He says the handkerchief was his favorite, the one his mama made for him with his letters on it. Solomon's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. The description was exact: the handkerchief Elizabeth had embroidered for Thomas's 8th birthday with his initials in blue thread. He had placed it in the cedar box on the hill, a private token no one else could have known about. "Emma," he said, his voice barely steady, "this is very important. Does Thomas tell you other things about me or about my family?" She nodded solemnly. "He says you were a good father, that you tried to save them when they were sick, but the medicine wasn't strong enough." Her small face clouded. "He says you shouldn't blame yourself anymore." Solomon closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. When he opened them again, Emma was watching him with a compassion far beyond her years. "I'm sorry if I made you sad," she said softly. "No, child, you haven't made me sad." Solomon reached across the table hesitantly, covering her small hand with his own. "Thank you for telling me about Thomas." Emma smiled, then the first real smile he had seen from her, transforming her solemn face into something luminous. "He's happy you're taking care of us. Sarah, too." The mention of his daughter's name alongside his son's sent another jolt through Solomon. Before he could respond, the front door opened, and Eleanor Miller's voice called out a greeting from the hallway. "In the kitchen," Solomon answered quickly, composing himself. Eleanor bustled in, arms laden with a basket of fresh bread and preserves. She paused at the sight of Solomon and Emma sitting hand in hand at the table. "Well," she said, her eyebrows rising slightly, "good morning to you both. I see someone's feeling more at home today." Emma withdrew her hand from Solomon's and returned to her milk, once again the silent, watchful child of the day before. "Jessie's in the barn," Solomon explained, rising to help Eleanor with her basket. "Thank you for bringing breakfast, though I've already cooked." "Nonsense! Growing children need more than eggs and bacon." She began unpacking the basket, setting out jars of preserves and a loaf of warm bread. "Besides, I have news." Something in her tone made Solomon glance toward Emma, a silent question in his eyes. Eleanor understood immediately. "Emma, dear, would you like to collect some eggs from the hen house? I noticed on my way in that the hens seem restless this morning." The little girl looked to Solomon for confirmation. When he nodded, she slipped from her chair and padded barefoot toward the back door. "Shoes first," Solomon called after her. "And a coat. It's still chilly out there." Once Emma had donned the oversized coat and boots Eleanor had brought the previous day and headed outside, Solomon turned to his friend with a questioning look. "What news?" Eleanor's usually cheerful face was grave. "I spoke with Reverend Collins in town this morning. He confirmed what I suspected. The Whitaker children, they're the ones who disappeared after that so-called Apache raid last year." Solomon nodded. "Jesse told me some of it this morning. He believes his parents were killed for documents his father possessed. Land deeds, possibly." "It's worse than that," Eleanor said, lowering her voice despite the empty house. "Thomas Whitaker wasn't just any surveyor. He was mapping the territory for the War Department, specifically focused on mineral deposits. Reverend Collins says there are rumors he discovered a significant silver vein on land that was supposed to be designated for the Apache Reservation." Solomon absorbed this information, connecting it to Jesse's account. "And now someone wants those survey maps." "Exactly." Eleanor glanced toward the window where Emma was visible crossing the yard toward the hen house. "The children are in danger, Solomon. Whoever killed their parents believes they know where those documents are hidden." "Jesse said he buried them somewhere," Solomon confirmed, though he may not understand their true significance. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice urgent. You need to be careful. There are powerful men in this territory who would kill for that kind of information. Men with government connections. Like Sheriff Ward, Solomon asked, recalling Jesse's mention of men from town questioning Harlan Reed. Eleanor's expression confirmed his suspicion. Mason Ward arrived shortly after the Whitaker murders, appointed by the territorial governor himself, though no one can recall the previous sheriff requesting a replacement. Solomon ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. What should I do, Eleanor? I can't turn them away, not now. Of course not, she agreed firmly. Those children need protection, but you also need to know what you're facing. She hesitated, then added, There's something else. A woman has been asking questions in town about the Whitaker children, arrived on yesterday's stage from Santa Fe. What kind of questions? Where they might be, who took them in after their parents died. She claims to be a relative, their mother's sister. Solomon's brow furrowed. Did Jesse mention an aunt? No, but then children that age might not know all their extended family. Eleanor stood, moving to the window to check on Emma. She's staying at the hotel in town, calls herself Rebecca Whitaker. The name meant nothing to Solomon, but the timing of the woman's arrival raised his suspicions. Could be legitimate. Could also be another person hunting for those documents. My thoughts exactly. Eleanor turned back to face him. I thought you should know, in case she comes looking out this way. Solomon nodded, grateful for the warning. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. She waved away his thanks. Just be careful, Solomon, and keep those children close. Her expression softened. They seem to be good for you. I haven't seen you this engaged with life in a long time. After Eleanor left, Solomon sat alone at the kitchen table, turning over the morning's revelations in his mind. The children's past was more complicated and more dangerous than he had initially realized. And then there was Emma's strange knowledge of Thomas's handkerchief, her claim that his dead son spoke to her in dreams. Solomon shook his head, pushing aside the metaphysical questions for more pressing practical concerns. If Eleanor was right, powerful men were searching for documents that Jesse had hidden. The children needed protection, and perhaps a more permanent arrangement than the temporary shelter he had initially offered. He was still deep in thought when Jesse appeared in the doorway, hay dust clinging to his borrowed shirt, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. Horses are done, the boy reported. Stalls, too. Solomon smiled, impressed by the boy's industry. That was quick work. Thank you, Jesse. Jesse shrugged off the praise, though a hint of pride showed in his posture. Emma still inside. She went to collect eggs, Solomon replied, suddenly realizing how long the little girl had been gone. Though that was a while ago now. A flash of alarm crossed Jesse's face. She gets distracted sometimes. Wanders off. Solomon rose immediately. Let's find her. They headed outside, scanning the yard. The henhouse door stood open, an empty basket on the ground beside it, but no sign of Emma. Jesse called her name, his voice tight with controlled panic. There, Solomon said, pointing toward the hill where he had buried the box, the same hill Emma had tried to climb during her sleepwalking episode. A small figure in an oversized coat stood near the crest, seemingly staring at something only she could see. Jesse broke into a run, Solomon close behind. As they approached, Emma turned, her expression eerily calm. He's here, she said when they reached her, pointing to the disturbed earth where Solomon had buried the box. And others, too. They're trying to tell me something. Jesse grabbed his sister's hand. Emma, you can't wander off like that. You scared us. The little girl looked contrite. I'm sorry, but I had to come. They were calling me. Solomon knelt before her, searching her face. Who was calling you, Emma? The dead people, she replied matter-of-factly. The ones who were killed with Mama and Papa. They want justice. Jessie made a small, distressed sound. Emma, stop. You know you're not supposed to talk about that. Solomon glanced between the siblings, noting Jessie's tension and Emma's otherworldly calm. It's all right, he assured the boy. Emma isn't in trouble. He turned back to the little girl. What do the dead people want you to do? Emma, find the box, she said simply. The metal one Papa gave Jessie to hide. It has the truth in it. Jessie stiffened beside her. Emma. Solomon placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Jessie, it's all right. I know about the box you hid. The one with your father's papers. The boy's eyes widened in alarm. You're working with them, he accused, backing away and pulling Emma with him. The men who killed our parents. No, Solomon said firmly. I'm not working with anyone. I want to protect you both. He met Jessie's fearful gaze directly. Your father found something valuable, a silver deposit on land, meant for the Apache reservation. That's why he was killed, and why those men are still looking for his survey maps. Jessie's expression shifted from fear to confusion. How do you know all this? Mrs. Miller told me, Solomon explained. She heard it from Reverend Collins in town. There are rumors about what happened to your family, Jessie. Not everyone believed the story about an Apache raid. The boy's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of his secret partially lifted. I don't know where the silver is, he admitted. I just took Pa's metal box and hid it after they were gone, like he always told me to do if something bad happened. Where did you hide it? Solomon asked gently. Jessie hesitated, glancing at his sister. Emma nodded encouragingly, and he sighed. In a cave about 5 miles south of Fort Selden. Pa showed it to me once, said it was our special place, if we ever got separated. His voice dropped. I went back later after they put us with that first family. Made sure it was still there. Solomon nodded, understanding the boy's caution. That was smart, Jessie. Very smart. Are you going to make us tell those men where it is? The vulnerability in Jessie's question tore at Solomon's heart. No, he said firmly. I'm going to help you stay safe from them, both of you. He looked between the two children, making a decision that felt inevitable rather than chosen. If you want to stay here with me permanently, I'll do everything in my power to protect you. Emma's face lit up with a smile, but Jessie remained cautious. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Solomon considered his answer carefully. The truth was complex, a tangle of grief, guilt, purpose, and something else he couldn't quite name, something that felt like fate. Because you need someone, he said finally. And perhaps I need someone too. A long moment passed as Jessie studied Solomon's face, searching for deception. Finally, the boy gave a small nod, not quite acceptance, but an acknowledgement of the offer and its sincerity. We should go back to the house, Solomon suggested, aware of how exposed they were on the hillside, or we can talk more there. As they walked back, Emma slipped her small hand into Solomon's, the gesture both trusting and oddly familiar, as if she had done it 100 times before. Jessie watched this interaction with an inscrutable expression, but said nothing. Inside, Solomon prepared a light lunch while the children washed up. As he sliced bread and cheese, his mind worked through their options. If Eleanor was right about the danger, they couldn't simply continue as they were. Steps would need to be taken to formalize the children's placement, with him legal steps that would require a trip to town and potentially unwanted attention. And then there was the matter of Rebecca Whitaker, the woman claiming to be the children's aunt. If she was legitimate, she had a stronger claim to them than Solomon did. But if she was just another person hunting for Thomas Whitaker's documents? Dr. Hayes, Jesse's voice interrupted his thoughts. The boy stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. There's a rider coming. Fast. Solomon moved quickly to the window. A cloud of dust marked the approach of a lone horseman from the direction of town, still too distant to identify. Take Emma upstairs, Solomon instructed, his voice calm but firm. Stay there until I call for you. Jesse nodded, disappearing to find his sister. Solomon retrieved his rifle from the rack by the door, a Winchester he had carried during the war, and checked that it was loaded. Then he stepped onto the front porch, the weapon held casually but visibly at his side. As the rider drew closer, Solomon could make out a woman's form, her dark riding habit billowing behind her as she urged her mount forward at a gallop. He tensed, finger resting near the trigger guard, prepared for trouble. The woman reined in her horse sharply at the foot of the porch steps, dust swirling around her. She was perhaps in her late 30s with striking features and dark hair pulled severely back from her face. Her riding clothes were well made but practical, and the way she dismounted spoke of long experience in the saddle. Dr. Solomon Hayes, she called, her voice carrying a slight accent Solomon couldn't immediately place. I am, he replied cautiously. And you would be Rebecca Whitaker. She climbed the steps with purposeful strides, stopping a respectful distance from the rifle. I believe you have my niece and nephew. Solomon studied her face, looking for family resemblances to Jesse or Emma. There was perhaps something in the set of her jaw that reminded him of Jesse's stubbornness, but nothing definitive. I have 2 children staying with me, he acknowledged carefully. Recently removed from an abusive situation with a man named Harlan Reed. Rebecca's expression hardened. Reed? Yes, I've heard about him from the locals. A drunk who took in orphans for the government stipend. Her eyes flashed with anger. I've been searching for Jesse and Emma for over a year, Dr. Hayes, since I learned of my sister's death. You're Sarah Whitaker's sister? Solomon asked, still not lowering the rifle. Yes, half-sister technically. Same father, different mothers. She reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew a folded document. I have papers from the territorial court in Santa Fe authorizing me to take custody of the children. Solomon took the document with his free hand, scanning it quickly. It appeared legitimate, complete, with official seals and signatures. May I ask why it took you a year to find them? He asked, handing the paper back. A shadow crossed Rebecca's face. I was in Europe when my sister and her husband were killed. It took months for the news to reach me, and months more to arrange passage back to America. Her voice tightened. By the time I arrived in New Mexico, the children had been placed with a family in the north. When I reached them, Jesse and Emma had already been moved again. Her story was plausible, but Solomon remained wary. The children have been through a great deal, Miss Whitaker. I'd like to hear from them before making any decisions about their future. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. They are my blood, Dr. Hayes. The court has recognized my claim. I don't dispute that, Solomon replied evenly. But I am responsible for their welfare at present, and I intend to ensure they aren't further traumatized. A tense silence stretched between them. Then Rebecca's posture relaxed marginally. Of course, I understand your caution. May I at least see them to assure myself they're well? Solomon hesitated, then nodded. Wait here, please. He backed into the house, keeping the rifle ready, and his eyes on Rebecca until he could close the door. Upstairs, he found Jesse and Emma huddled in their room, the boy standing protectively before his sister. There's a woman here, Solomon told them quietly. She says she's your Aunt Rebecca, your mother's sister. Jesse's brow furrowed in confusion. Ma never mentioned a sister, not that I remember. She says she's your half-sister, same father, different mothers, Solomon explained. She has court papers giving her custody of you both. Emma peered around her brother. Is she nice? She asked, her first words since the visitor's arrival. Solomon considered the question. I'm not sure yet. She seems concerned about you, but… He hesitated, not wanting to frighten the children unnecessarily. I'd like you to meet her, but you don't have to go with her today no matter what her papers say. I want to make sure she is who she claims to be. Jesse nodded, his expression serious. We'll meet her, but we stay together. Of course, Solomon agreed. I'll be right there with you. They descended the stairs together, Solomon leading the way with the rifle now slung over his shoulder, less threatening, but still accessible. Rebecca Whitaker stood in the parlor where Solomon had left her, examining a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, the same daguerreotype of Solomon's family that he had studied the night before. She turned as they entered, her composed expression faltering at the sight of the children. Jesse, she breathed. Emma, you've both grown so much. Jesse stepped slightly in front of his sister, his posture defensive. Our Aunt Ma never told us about you. Rebecca smiled sadly. Sarah and I weren't close, I'm afraid. We had different mothers, and I was much older. I was already in Europe when she married your father. She knelt to the children's level. But we wrote letters. She sent me a photograph of you both last Christmas. I've carried it with me ever since. As she reached into her pocket again and withdrew a small, worn photograph, the kind taken by traveling photographers who passed through frontier settlements. It showed a family group, a bearded man, a smiling woman, and two children who were unmistakably younger versions of Jesse and Emma. Jesse stared at the photograph, recognition and grief flickering across his face. That's us, with Ma and Pa. Rebecca nodded. Yes, your mother wrote to me about your father's work, how you moved from place to place. She hesitated, then added gently, I know what happened to them, Jesse, and I know it wasn't Apaches who did it. The boy's head snapped up, surprise and wariness in his eyes. How do you know that? Because I've been investigating since I arrived in America, Rebecca replied. Your father's work made powerful enemies, Jesse, men who wanted the land he was surveying for themselves, not for the Apache reservation it was intended to become. Solomon watched this exchange carefully, noting the genuine emotion in Rebecca's voice and the slowly dawning recognition in Jesse's expression. You look like Ma, the boy said suddenly. Around the eyes. Rebecca smiled, a hint of tears brightening her gaze. She looked like our father. I always envied that. Emma, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Do you hear them too? She asked unexpectedly. Rebecca blinked in confusion. Hear who, Emma? The people who died, the ones who talk when you're sleeping. An uncomfortable silence fell. Rebecca glanced at Solomon, who kept his expression carefully neutral, then back to Emma. No, sweetheart, I don't hear them. She reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. But your mother used to say similar things when we were girls. She had dreams that came true sometimes. Our grandmother called it the knowing. This detail, so specific and yet unlikely to be common knowledge, shifted something in Solomon's assessment. Rebecca Whitaker might well be who she claimed to be. Miss Whitaker, he said, breaking the silence, would you join us for lunch? The children and I were about to eat, and it would give you all a chance to become reacquainted. Rebecca straightened, surprise and gratitude briefly visible in her expression. I would appreciate that, Dr. Hayes. Thank you. The meal was initially awkward, with Jesse watching Rebecca's every move, and Emma eating in silence. Gradually, however, Rebecca drew the boy out with questions about his interests and gentle reminiscences about his mother as a child. She was stubborn, just like you, Rebecca told him, smiling at a memory. Once she decided to tame a wild pony that grazed near our home. Everyone told her it couldn't be done, but she spent weeks leaving apples for it, speaking softly to it. And you know what? Eventually, that pony ate right from her hand. Jesse's expression softened at this glimpse of his mother's character. She taught me to whistle for the birds, he offered. Said each kind answers to a different tune. Rebecca nodded. That sounds like Sarah. She always had a way with animals. Her gaze shifted to Emma, who was quietly arranging her food into patterns on her plate. And you, little one, do you remember the songs your mother used to sing? Emma looked up, her blue eyes solemn. The one about the river and the willows. She sang it every night. A flash of genuine surprise crossed Rebecca's face. Yes, that's right. Our grandmother taught us that song. She began to hum softly, then sang a few words in a language Solomon didn't recognize. Emma's face lit up with recognition. She joined in hesitantly, her small voice matching Rebecca's on the unfamiliar syllables. When the impromptu duet ended, Rebecca brushed a tear from her cheek. You remember well, Emma. Your mother would be proud. Solomon observed this interaction with mixed emotions. Rebecca seemed genuine in her affection for the children, and they were responding to her, especially Emma, who had shown more animation in the past few minutes than in all her time at the ranch. Yet the thought of them leaving created an unexpected, hollow feeling in his chest. Miss Whitaker, he said as lunch concluded, I don't question your claim to the children, but I am concerned about their safety. Mrs. Miller, my neighbor, tells me there are men in town who may still be looking for them, or more specifically for documents their father possessed. Rebecca's expression grew serious. You're well informed, Dr. Hayes. Yes, there are dangerous men involved in this matter. That's partly why I've come to take the children to San Francisco, where I have a home. They'll be beyond reach there. Jesse's head shot up. San Francisco. That's far away. Yes, Rebecca acknowledged. But it's safe, Jesse. And you'll have opportunities there that don't exist in this territory. Schools, libraries, museums. The boy looked torn, glancing between Rebecca and Solomon. What about Pa's papers? The ones I hid? Rebecca hesitated, choosing her words carefully. They're important evidence, Jesse. They prove that your father discovered silver on land, promised to the Apache tribes, and that certain officials plan to redraw the reservation boundaries to claim that silver for themselves. Those same officials ordered your parents killed, Solomon concluded, the pieces falling into place. And they'll keep hunting for those documents as long as they believe they exist. Rebecca nodded grimly. Exactly. Jesse squared his shoulders, making a decision. I'll take you to them, to Pa's papers, but only if Dr. Hayes comes too. Rebecca glanced at Solomon, assessing him anew. You trust him that much already? He helped us when no one else would, Jesse said simply. And he doesn't want anything from us, not like the others. Solomon felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the boy's declaration of trust. I'll come if you want me to, Jesse, but this is your decision. Rebecca considered this arrangement, then nodded. Very well. Dr. Hayes can accompany us. She turned to Solomon. Can you ride out tomorrow? I'd prefer to retrieve the documents quickly and be on our way to San Francisco. Tomorrow. Solomon agreed, though the thought of the children leaving so soon created a sharp pang he hadn't anticipated. We'll need to be careful. If what you say about these officials is true, they may be watching for any unusual activity. I've been careful, Rebecca assured him. I've told no one in town my true purpose, only that I'm seeking my sister's children. They spent the remainder of the afternoon making preparations for the journey.
Solomon gathered supplies while Rebecca told the children stories about San Francisco, the ships in the harbor,
The bustling markets, the grand houses on the hills. Emma listened with wide-eyed wonder, but Jessie remained subdued, occasionally glancing at Solomon with an expression the doctor couldn't quite interpret. As evening approached, Solomon offered Rebecca the guest room for the night, moving the children's belongings to the room that had once belonged to his son. He hesitated at the threshold, watching as Jessie arranged their few possessions on the bed that Thomas had once slept in. "You can put your things in the drawers," Solomon suggested. "There's plenty of room." Jessie nodded carefully, folding Emma's dresses, the ones Eleanor had brought, and placing them in the cedar-lined drawer. He paused, lifting something from the bottom of the drawer, a small wooden soldier, hand-carved and painted in a faded blue uniform. "That was Thomas's," Solomon said quietly. "He collected them. Had quite an army at one point." Jessie examined the toy soldier with careful hands. "Was he my age when he died?" "A little younger. 8. Solomon leaned against the doorframe, memories washing over him. "He wanted to be a doctor like me. Used to bandage his toy soldiers when they got wounded in battle." Jessie set the soldier on top of the dresser, positioning it to stand guard. "Emma says she talks to him sometimes. To your Thomas." Solomon nodded, not surprised that Jessie knew of his sister's claims. "What do you think about that?" The boy shrugged, his expression troubled. "She's always been different. Knows things she shouldn't. Ma said it was a gift, but it scares people." He glanced toward the door, lowering his voice. "Even Aunt Rebecca. I saw her face when Emma asked if she heard the dead people too." Solomon considered this observation. "Your aunt mentioned that your mother had similar abilities, dreams that came true. She called it the knowing." "Yeah," Jessie acknowledged. "Ma could tell when storms were coming or if someone was sick before they showed symptoms." His voice dropped further. "She knew they were going to die. That last night. She made us hide in the cellar, even before the men came." The revelation sent a chill through Solomon. "She was trying to protect you both." Jessie nodded, his young face grave with the weight of survival. "I'm supposed to protect Emma now. That's what Ma told me before." He swallowed hard. "Before they found her." Solomon crossed the room and knelt before the boy, meeting his eyes directly. "You've done an extraordinary job, Jessie. Your mother would be proud of how you've cared for your sister." Unexpected tears welled in Jessie's eyes. He blinked them back fiercely, turning away to continue unpacking. Solomon recognized the need for privacy and stood moving toward the door. "Dr. Hayes," Jessie called as Solomon reached the threshold. "Yes?" "If we go to San Francisco with Aunt Rebecca, will we ever see you again?" The question laid bare the connection that had formed between them in just 2 days, fragile but real, like a seedling pushing through hard soil. "I hope so, Jessie," Solomon replied honestly, "and you'll always have a place here if you ever want to return." The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and returned to his task. Solomon closed the door softly behind him, a strange mixture of loss and acceptance settling in his chest. Downstairs, he found Rebecca in the parlor, examining his bookshelf with interest. She turned as he entered, a volume of Emerson's essays in her hand. "The children are settled?" she asked. "Yes, in my son's old room." Rebecca returned the book to its place. "Mrs. Miller mentioned your loss." "I'm sorry." Solomon acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. "It was 3 years ago." "And yet the wound remains fresh," she observed perceptively. "I recognize the look. It's the same one I saw in the mirror for years after my husband died in Italy." This personal revelation surprised Solomon. "I didn't realize you'd been married." Briefly, he was an American diplomat in Florence. She moved to the window, gazing out at the gathering dusk. "The children seem to have formed an attachment to you quickly." "They're resilient," Solomon replied, "and starved for kindness after their time with Reed." Rebecca turned to face him fully. "You've done them a great service, Dr. Hayes. I won't forget that." She hesitated, then added, "If retrieving Thomas's documents proves as dangerous as I suspect it might be, would you consider accompanying us further, perhaps all the way to Santa Fe, where I could arrange secure transport to California?" The request startled Solomon. "You're concerned about being followed?" "Once we have the documents, yes." Rebecca's expression grew somber. "The men involved in this conspiracy include a territorial judge, at least one military officer, and possibly your local sheriff. They've killed before to protect their scheme. They won't hesitate to do so again." Solomon contemplated the implications. A journey to Santa Fe would mean weeks away from the ranch, but Eleanor could oversee things in his absence. And the thought of ensuring the children's safety all the way to their departure held a certain appeal. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "Let's retrieve the documents first and assess the situation." Rebecca seemed satisfied with this response. "Fair enough." She moved toward the stairs. "I should rest. Tomorrow may prove challenging." After she had gone, Solomon sat alone in the gathering darkness, mind turning over the day's revelations. Rebecca Whitaker appeared genuine in her concern for the children, and her knowledge of their family seemed too detailed to be fabricated. Yet something about the situation continued to trouble him, a sense that pieces of the puzzle remained hidden. He thought of Emma's strange connection to his dead son, her claim that Thomas spoke to her in dreams. Could it be mere coincidence that these children with their tragic past, so similar to his own loss, had come into his life? Or was there some design at work beyond rational explanation? Solomon shook his head, dismissing the metaphysical questions as a distraction from more immediate concerns. Tomorrow, they would retrieve Thomas Whitaker's hidden documents, papers that powerful men had already killed to obtain. Whatever mysteries surrounded the children and their connection to his own past would have to wait. As he rose to retire for the night, a soft sound from the porch caught his attention. Solomon moved quietly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, silhouetted against the moonlit yard, Emma in her nightgown, apparently sleepwalking again. Solomon hurried outside, approaching the child carefully. "Emma," he called softly, "you should be in bed." The little girl turned her eyes open, but unfocused, just as they had been the previous night. "They're coming," she said, her voice distant and oddly adult. "The men who killed Mama and Papa. They know we're here." A chill ran through Solomon that had nothing to do with the night air. "How do they know, Emma?" "They followed her," Emma replied, pointing toward the second floor where Rebecca slept. "They've been watching her since she arrived in town." Solomon felt his blood run cold. "Are you sure, Emma?" The child nodded solemnly. "Thomas says to be careful. He says not everyone is who they seem to be." Before Solomon could question her further, the sound of approaching horses reached his ears, multiple riders moving fast, but with an attempt at stealth, their approach partially masked by the soft ground of the pasture rather than the harder-packed dirt of the road. Emma's warning had come just in time. Solomon reacted instantly, years of battlefield instinct surging to the surface. He scooped Emma into his arms and sprinted back to the house, the child's slight weight barely slowing his stride. "Wake up!" he whispered urgently as he carried her inside, locking the door behind them. "Emma, I need you to wake up now." The little girl's eyes cleared, confusion replacing the distant expression as she returned to full consciousness. Dr. Hayes, what's happening? Riders coming, he said, simply setting her down at the foot of the stairs. Go wake your brother and Miss Whitaker. Tell them to dress quickly and meet me in the kitchen. Can you do that? Emma nodded, suddenly alert, and hurried up the stairs with surprising stealth for a child her age. Solomon moved swiftly to his gun cabinet, unlocking it and retrieving his Winchester rifle and Colt revolver. He loaded both weapons with practiced efficiency, then gathered ammunition, stuffing it into the pockets of his coat. The sound of approaching horses grew closer, still attempting stealth, but unmistakable in the quiet night. Solomon estimated at least 4 riders, possibly more. Too many to fight off directly if they meant harm. Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs fully dressed, despite the late hour, as if she had never undressed for bed. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. "Riders," Solomon replied, nodding toward the window. "At least 4 coming through the pasture rather than the road." Rebecca descended quickly, Jessie and Emma close behind her. The boy had dressed hastily, his shirt buttoned incorrectly, but he moved with focused alertness. Emma, still in her nightgown, clutched her brother's hand. "Could be innocent travelers," Rebecca suggested, though her tone conveyed doubt. Solomon shook his head. "Not at this hour, and not through the pasture." He handed the Colt to Rebecca without hesitation. "You know how to use this?" She checked the cylinder with practiced ease. "Yes," Solomon nodded, unsurprised. "There's a root cellar behind the pantry. Hidden door under the rug. Take the children there while I see who our visitors are." "I'm not hiding," Jesse protested, his young face set with determination. "I can help." "You help by protecting your sister," Solomon told him firmly. "That's your job right now, Jesse." The boy hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, or if you hear sustained gunfire, there's a tunnel from the cellar that leads to the creek bed." Solomon continued addressing Rebecca. "Follow it east about half a mile to the Miller place. Eleanor will help you." Rebecca studied his face, something like respect dawning in her eyes. "You've prepared for trouble before." "The war taught me to have escape routes," Solomon replied grimly. "Now go quickly." As Rebecca ushered the children toward the pantry, Emma broke away, suddenly running back to Solomon. She threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Be careful," she whispered. "Thomas says to remember your promise." Before Solomon could respond, she turned and hurried after her brother and aunt. The strange message lingered in his mind as he positioned himself by the front window, rifle-ready eyes scanning the darkness for movement. The riders had stopped just beyond the edge of the yard, dismounting in the shadows of the cottonwood trees. In the pale moonlight, Solomon could make out dark silhouettes, men moving with military precision, spreading out to surround the house. One figure remained slightly apart, directing the others with subtle hand gestures. Solomon recognized the distinctive shape of a lawman's hat on that central figure, confirming his worst suspicions. Sheriff Mason Ward had come calling, and not for a social visit. The front door rattled suddenly as someone tested the lock. Solomon moved silently across the room, positioning himself against the wall beside the door, rifle raised. A heavy knock followed, then Ward's voice deceptively casual. "Dr. Hayes, it's Sheriff Ward. Need to have a word with you." Solomon remained silent, weighing his options. Direct confrontation would likely end badly given the numbers, but he needed to buy time for Rebecca and the children. "Come on now, Doc," Ward called again, a harder edge entering his voice. "I know you're in there. Just want to ask about those Whitaker kids. Heard you might be sheltering them." Solomon took a deep breath, then replied, "It's late, Sheriff. Can't this wait until morning?" A pause. Then, "Afraid not, Doc. Official business. Got reports of child abduction. Need to check on their welfare. The transparent lie confirmed Solomon's fears. Ward wasn't here for any legitimate purpose. He needed a distraction, something to draw attention away from the house, while the others escaped. "Give me a minute to get dressed," Solomon called, mind racing. "I'll meet you on the porch." Without waiting for a response, he moved quickly to the kitchen, grabbing a lantern and a bottle of the medicinal alcohol he kept for sterilizing instruments. He soaked a rag in the flammable liquid, stuffed it into the bottle's neck, and moved to the back door that opened toward the barn. Peering through the small window, Solomon could see two of Ward's men positioned near the barn. A diversion in that direction would draw attention away from the house and the hidden cellar entrance, but he would need to be precise. Solomon unlocked the door, silently, took one final look toward the pantry where Rebecca and the children were hidden, and slipped outside, keeping to the shadows of the porch. He skirted the edge of the yard, moving with the stealth he had learned during night maneuvers in the war. When he reached the woodpile at the corner of the house, Solomon struck a match, lit the alcohol-soaked rag, and hurled the makeshift firebomb toward the far side of the barn, away from the animals inside. The bottle shattered against the wooden wall, flames erupting instantly, bright and hungry in the darkness. Shouts of alarm rose from Ward's men, exactly as Solomon had hoped. He used the confusion to dart toward the corral, where he opened the gate, slapping the nearest horse on its flank, to startle it into running. Other horses followed, creating additional chaos as they bolted into the night. Solomon circled back toward the house, intent on ensuring Rebecca and the children had time to escape. He had nearly reached the kitchen door when a voice stopped him cold. "That's far enough, Doc." Solomon turned slowly to find Sheriff Ward standing 10 paces away, revolver aimed steadily at his chest. The lawman's face was partially shadowed by his hat, but his posture spoke of controlled violence, barely contained. "Quite a distraction," Ward commented, gesturing toward the burning barn with his free hand. "But poorly executed. You should have run while you had the chance." "What do you want, Ward?" Solomon asked, playing for time, his mind calculating the distance to the rifle still slung across his back. Ward's teeth gleamed in the firelight as he smiled without humor. "Just some papers that belong to me. Well, to the territorial government. Survey maps made by Thomas Whitaker before his unfortunate demise." "I don't have any such papers," Solomon replied truthfully. "No," Ward agreed, "but those brats of his do, or at least they know where they're hidden." He took a step closer, gun unwavering. "So here's how this goes, Doc. You tell me where they are, I collect them, and maybe everyone walks away from this alive." Solomon measured his options, finding them few and poor. Any sudden movement would likely result in a bullet. His only advantage was that Ward clearly believed the children were still inside the house. "They're not here," he said finally. Ward's expression hardened. "Don't lie to me, Hayes. My men saw you bring those kids home 2 days ago. Harlan Reed sold them to you right out back of the saloon." "I sent them away," Solomon improvised, "with my neighbor Eleanor Miller, after I heard rumors about what really happened to their parents." A flash of uncertainty crossed Ward's face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "When, this afternoon," Solomon lied. "They're probably halfway to Santa Fe by now." Ward studied him for a long moment, weighing the truth of his words. "Check the house," he called to his men, without taking his eyes off Solomon. "Every room." 2 men broke away from fighting the barn fire and headed toward the house. Solomon tensed, praying that Rebecca had had the sense to take the children through the tunnel as he'd instructed. "You're making a mistake, Ward," Solomon said, attempting to keep the sheriff's attention focused on him. "Those survey maps won't just disappear if you kill the children. Others know about them too." Ward's expression shifted subtly. "Others like who?" "Like Rebecca Whitaker," Solomon replied, deciding to use the truth strategically. the children's aunt.
She arrived from San Francisco yesterday looking for them. This information clearly caught Ward by surprise.
Whitaker had no family, he said, but with less certainty. His wife did, Solomon countered. A half-sister in California. She's been searching for the children since she learned of her sister's death. Ward processed this, visibly recalculating. Where is she now? I don't know, Solomon lied. She left for town after learning I'd sent the children away. The men emerged from the house before Ward could respond. Nothing, Sheriff, one called. Place is empty. Relief flooded through Solomon, though he kept his expression neutral. Rebecca had heeded his warning and taken the children through the tunnel. Ward's face darkened with anger. You're lying, Hayes. Those kids were here. He raised his gun, aiming it more deliberately. Last chance. Where are they? Solomon straightened, preparing for what might come. I told you. They're gone. For a long moment, Ward seemed on the verge of pulling the trigger. Then abruptly, he lowered the weapon. Bring him, he ordered his men. He knows more than he's saying. We'll continue this conversation somewhere more private. Rough hands seized Solomon before he could react, disarming him and binding his wrists with rope. As they dragged him toward the waiting horses, the barn fire illuminated the scene in hellish orange light, casting long shadows across the yard where 3 years earlier his children had played. Solomon offered no resistance as they hoisted him onto a horse. Whatever happened to him now, Rebecca and the children had escaped. For the moment, that was enough. They rode for nearly an hour, following a winding path through the hills northeast of Solomon's ranch. The night air grew cooler as they climbed the landscape, changing from open pasture land to rocky outcroppings and scattered juniper trees. Solomon memorized the route as best he could, noting landmarks by moonlight. Their destination proved to be an abandoned mining camp, a collection of weathered wooden structures nestled in a small box canyon. Several horses were already tethered outside the largest building, suggesting others had arrived before them. Ward dismounted first, gesturing for his men to bring Solomon into the main structure. Inside, oil lamps illuminated a rough interior, a large table surrounded by mismatched chairs, shelves lined with mining equipment and supplies, a pot-bellied stove in one corner providing meager warmth. 3 men looked up as they entered. Solomon recognized one immediately, Harlan Reed, his face bruised and his right arm bandaged. The other 2 were strangers to Solomon, one in the uniform of a cavalry officer, the other in an expensive suit that marked him as a man of position. "What's this, Mason?" the suited man asked, his voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education. "I thought you were bringing the children." "Change of plans, Judge," Ward replied, pushing Solomon into a chair. "Doc here claims he sent them away this afternoon, with their aunt." The judge, evidently one of the territorial officials Rebecca had mentioned, straightened in surprise. "Aunt? What aunt?" "Rebecca Whitaker," Ward supplied. "Half-sister to Whitaker's wife, apparently, from San Francisco." The cavalry officer swore softly. "That's impossible. We verified there was no family." "Apparently you missed one," Ward replied dryly. The judge turned his attention to Solomon, studying him with cold calculation. "Dr. Hayes, isn't it the surgeon from back east who lost his family in '65? Solomon met the man's gaze steadily, surprised and unsettled that this stranger knew such personal details about him. "Judge, Holbrook, Territorial Circuit Court." The judge smiled thinly. "You've involved yourself in matters beyond your concern, Doctor. Those children possess information vital to territorial development. Their cooperation would be handsomely rewarded." "By information, you mean the survey maps showing silver deposits on Apache land?"
Solomon replied, testing his understanding of the situation. "The same maps that got their parents killed." Judge Holbrook's smile disappeared. "Unfortunate business, that." Whitaker proved unreasonable, refused to understand the greater good his discovery represented. "The greater good of lining your pockets?" Solomon asked, unable to contain his disgust. The cavalry officer stepped forward, backhanding Solomon across the face with enough force to rock his chair. "Watch your tongue when addressing the judge." Solomon tasted blood, but maintained his composure. "The Apache reservation boundaries were established by federal treaty. Redrawing them to seize mineral rights would be illegal." "Treaties can be renegotiated," Judge Holbrook replied dismissively. "The federal government is eager to promote development in the territories. With the right documentation showing the land's true value, Washington would approve the boundary adjustments." "Documentation like Whitaker's survey maps," Solomon concluded. "Precisely." Holbrook leaned forward. "Now, where are the children, Dr. Hayes, and this alleged aunt?" Solomon remained silent, weighing his options. Every moment he stalled gave Rebecca and the children more time to escape. Ward moved to stand beside the judge. "He's protecting them. Claims they're headed to Santa Fe, but I don't believe it." Harlan Reed spoke up for the first time, his voice slurred either from drink or pain. "The boy knows where the box is. He told me once when he was feverish. Something about a cave near Fort Selden." This revelation shifted the atmosphere in the room immediately. Judge Holbrook's eyes narrowed with interest. "A cave, did he say where exactly?" Reed shrugged his good shoulder. "Just that his pa showed it to him, said it was their secret place." The cavalry officer turned to Holbrook. "We should split up. Half the men to Fort Selden to search for this cave, the rest to Santa Fe to intercept them if they're headed there." The judge nodded agreement. "Captain Ellis, you take 4 men to Fort Selden. Sheriff Ward, you and the others head toward Santa Fe." He gestured toward Solomon. "And him. Bring him," Ward decided. "He might prove useful as leverage if we find the children." Holbrook stood adjusting his expensive coat. "I'll return to town. Less suspicious if I maintain my normal routine." He fixed Solomon with a cold stare. "A pity you chose the wrong side in this matter, Doctor. A man of your skills could have benefited greatly from association with the territory's future leaders." Solomon met the judge's gaze without flinching. "I've seen enough death in my lifetime, Your Honor. I won't help you add 2 children to the count." Holbrook's expression hardened. "Your moral stand may cost you your life, Dr. Hayes. Consider that as you ride." With that, the judge departed, leaving Solomon alone with Ward, Captain Ellis, and their men. Reed had fallen asleep or passed out in his chair, his head lolling against the rough wooden wall. "Get him ready to travel," Ward ordered, gesturing toward Solomon. "We leave in 10 minutes." As the men busied themselves with preparations, Solomon's thoughts turned to Rebecca and the children. If they had followed his instructions, they would have reached Eleanor's house by now. But what then? The tunnel from his cellar emerged well away from the main road, offering temporary concealment, but eventually they would need to travel in the open. And if the children truly knew where Thomas Whitaker's documents were hidden, would Rebecca try to retrieve them before fleeing the territory? The cave near Fort Selden that Reed had mentioned might be their destination rather than Santa Fe. Solomon's speculations were interrupted as 2 men hauled him to his feet and marched him outside. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, the first pale hint of dawn breaking over the distant mountains. A new horse had been prepared for him, his hands bound to the saddle horn once he was mounted. Ward approached, checking the bindings himself. "One last chance, Doc. Where were they really headed?" Solomon looked down at the sheriff, seeing not just corruption, but a deeper moral bankruptcy.
Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you." Ward's face tightened with anger, but he controlled it, stepping back from the horse. "We'll see if you maintain that attitude when your life truly depends on it." The small party divided as planned. Captain Ellis and 4 men heading south toward Fort Selden, while Ward and 3 others with Solomon in tow turned northwest toward the Santa Fe Road. As they rode away from the mining camp, Solomon cast one final glance at the eastern horizon, drawing strength from the coming dawn. Whatever fate awaited him, he had kept his promise to protect the children, at least for now. He could only hope that Rebecca would get them safely beyond the reach of men like Ward and Holbrook. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Solomon's wrists had been untied from the saddle horn, but remained bound together, making riding uncomfortable and escape unlikely. Ward set a punishing pace, clearly intent on reaching the Santa Fe Road by midday to intercept any travelers heading north. As they crested a rise overlooking a broad valley, Ward signaled a halt. He dismounted, retrieving a spyglass from his saddlebag, and scanned the terrain below. Solomon followed his gaze, noticing a thin plume of dust rising in the distance, a wagon or riders on the main road. "There," Ward said, passing the spyglass to one of his men. "Single wagon moving fast. Could be them." The man looked, then nodded. "2 adults on the seat. Can't see if there are children inside." Ward remounted, his expression grim with determination. "We'll intercept them at the creek crossing. Move out." They rode down from the ridge, angling to intersect the road, where it crossed a shallow stream about a mile ahead. Solomon's mind raced, searching for some way to warn the approaching travelers if they proved to be Rebecca and the children. But with his hands bound and surrounded by armed men, his options were severely limited. As they neared the crossing, Ward gestured for his men to take positions among the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. Solomon was dragged from his horse and pushed to the ground behind a large rock, a gun pressed to his temple in silent warning to remain quiet. The approaching wagon became visible, bouncing along the rutted road at a pace that suggested urgency. Solomon strained to see its occupants relieved when he made out the forms of an older couple, not Rebecca, and the children at all, but likely ordinary travelers heading to Santa Fe. Ward clearly reached the same conclusion. He swore under his breath and signaled his men to stand down. The wagon passed the crossing, undisturbed its occupants, unaware of how close they had come to a potentially deadly encounter. "False alarm," one of Ward's men muttered. "Waste of time." Ward rounded on Solomon, his patience clearly fraying. "You're sure they were headed this way?" Solomon shrugged as best he could with bound hands. "I told you I don't know where they went. I merely suggested Santa Fe as a possibility." And the sheriff's face darkened with frustration. He grabbed Solomon by the collar, hauling him to his feet. "I'm tired of your games, Doc. You know more than you're saying, and I'm running out of patience." A faint sound drew Ward's attention before he could act on his threat, the distant report of a rifle echoing from the south. He released Solomon abruptly, turning toward the sound. "That came from the direction of Fort Selden," one of his men observed. Ward's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. "Ellis must have found something." He gestured toward Solomon. "Get him back on his horse. We're changing course." They rode south at a gallop, Solomon struggling to maintain his seat with bound hands. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying as they left the higher elevations for the flatter terrain surrounding Fort Selden. By mid-afternoon, they had covered significant ground, guided by occasional distant gunfire that suggested conflict ahead. As they approached the fort, the sounds of shooting ceased. Ward signaled for caution, and they proceeded more slowly, alert for any sign of Captain Ellis and his men. They found them at the mouth of a narrow canyon about 2 miles east of the fort. 2 horses stood riderless beside a rocky outcropping, while 3 men took cover behind Boulder's rifles trained on the canyon entrance. Ward dismounted, approaching Captain Ellis, who crouched behind the largest boulder. "What's the situation?" Ellis gestured toward the canyon. "Found the cave. Whitaker's sister-in-law is in there with the children. They've got cover and a good position. Already lost Peterson to a lucky shot from the woman." Solomon felt a surge of hope at this news. Rebecca had managed to reach the cave ahead of Ellis, presumably to retrieve the hidden documents. Now she was defending her position, and doing so effectively, it seemed. "Any way around?" Ward asked, studying the canyon's steep walls. Ellis shook his head. "Not without climbing equipment. It's a natural fortress." Ward considered this, then turned to Solomon with a calculating look. "Maybe we can persuade them to come out peacefully." He gestured to his men. "Bring him forward." Solomon was dragged to the front of their makeshift defensive line, positioned where those in the cave could see him clearly. Ward cut his bonds, then pressed a revolver to his back. "Call to them," the sheriff ordered. "Tell them to come out with the documents, or you die." Solomon weighed his options, knowing that Rebecca was unlikely to surrender regardless of his situation. Yet he needed to communicate somehow, to let her know he was alive, and to coordinate some form of resistance. "Rebecca," he called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "It's Solomon Hayes. They have me at gunpoint." A moment of silence followed, then Rebecca's voice rang out from the shadows of the canyon. "Are you hurt, Dr. Hayes?" "No," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "They want Thomas's documents in exchange for my life. But you should know Judge Holbrook and Captain Ellis are behind this. They redrew the Apache reservation boundaries to claim the silver deposits Thomas discovered." Ward jabbed the gun harder into Solomon's back. "Enough details. Tell them to come out now." Solomon ignored him, continuing his explanation. "They killed Thomas and Sarah Whitaker to get the survey maps. They'll kill you and the children too, regardless of any promises they make." This time Ward struck Solomon across the back of the head with the revolver, sending him to his knees. "One more word about Holbrook, and I'll shoot you where you kneel," the sheriff hissed. From the canyon came Jesse's voice, high and frightened, but determined. "Dr. Hayes, we won't let them hurt you." "Stay back, Jesse!" Solomon shouted, earning another blow from Ward that split the skin at his temple. Blood trickled down his face as he struggled to remain conscious. "Enough of this," Ellis said, stepping forward. "Whitaker, we have the canyon surrounded. Send out the documents and we'll let Hayes go. You have my word as an officer." Rebecca's laugh echoed from the canyon, a cold, hard sound without humor. "Your word means nothing, Ellis. I know what you did to my sister and her husband." Ellis stiffened in surprise. "You can't prove anything." "The documents prove everything," Rebecca called back. "Thomas's survey maps show the original reservation boundaries and the silver deposits within them. His journal names you, Holbrook and Ward, specifically as the ones who approached him about falsifying the boundaries." This revelation created a stir among Ward's men, who exchanged uneasy glances. Solomon, still on his knees, felt the atmosphere shift subtly. Not all of these men had known the full extent of their leader's crimes. "Those are government documents," Ellis shouted, his composure slipping. "Whitaker stole them. He was a traitor." "He was upholding the law," Rebecca countered, "honoring the treaty with the Apache Nation. You're the traitors." Ward had heard enough. He yanked Solomon to his feet, pressing the revolver to his temple. "Final warning," he called. "Send out the documents, or Hayes dies right now. I'll count to 3. 1. "Wait!" Jesse's voice rang out closer than before. He had emerged from the shadows at the canyon's entrance, holding a metal box about the size of a large book. "I have what you want. Don't hurt him." "Jesse, no!" Solomon shouted, struggling against Ward's grip. The boy stood his ground, chin raised defiantly, despite the fear evident in his eyes. "Let Dr. Hayes go, and I'll give you the box." Ward's hold on Solomon relaxed slightly, as his attention fixed on the metal container. "Bring it here, boy." Slowly. Jesse took a tentative step forward, then another. Solomon watched in horror, knowing that once Ward had the documents, both he and Jesse would become expendable. "That's it," Ward encouraged, his voice deceptively gentle. "Just a few more steps." Jesse had advanced halfway between the canyon entrance and Ward's position when a flash of movement caught Solomon's eye, Emma darting from the shadows toward her brother. At the same moment, a rifle cracked from higher up the canyon wall. One of Ellis's men cried out and fell clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted instantly. Ward shoved Solomon aside and raised his revolver toward Jesse. Solomon lunged, tackling the sheriff's legs. The gun discharged the bullet, striking the ground near Jesse's feet. The boy froze in terror as Emma reached him, pulling at his arm. "Run!" Solomon shouted, grappling with Ward on the ground. More shots rang out from the canyon, Rebecca providing covering fire from multiple positions, creating the impression of greater numbers. Ellis and his remaining men dove for cover, returning fire blindly toward the canyon walls. Ward brought the butt of his revolver down on Solomon's shoulder, the pun momentarily paralyzing. The sheriff struggled to aim at the retreating children, but Solomon grabbed his gun arm, forcing it upward. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air. In the confusion, Jesse and Emma had nearly reached the canyon entrance. Solomon saw Rebecca emerge briefly from cover, firing 2 precise shots that sent Ellis and his men scrambling backward. Then she too disappeared into the shadows, following the children to safety. Ward, realizing his quarry was escaping, roared with frustration. He struck Solomon again, this time connecting with his jaw. Stars exploded across Solomon's vision, his grip on Ward's arm weakening. The sheriff tore free, staggered to his feet, and aimed at Solomon's prone form. "You've made your choice, Doc," Ward snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. A rifle shot echoed across the canyon. Ward's expression changed from rage to surprise as a dark stain blossomed on his chest. He looked down, uncomprehending, then crumpled to the ground beside Solomon. More shots followed in rapid succession. Ellis fell next, then one of his men. The others broke running for their horses in panic. Solomon dragged himself to his knees, dazed and disoriented. Through blurred vision, he saw figures emerging from the rocks around the canyon. Not Rebecca and the children, but men in traditional Apache dress rifles in hand. They moved with the silent efficiency of experienced warriors, securing the area with practiced precision. As darkness threatened to claim him, Solomon felt gentle hands lifting him. Rebecca's face swam into focus above him, concern etched in her features. "Stay with me, Solomon," she urged. "You're safe now." He tried to speak, to ask about the children, but consciousness slipped away before the words could form. Solomon awakened to firelight and the soft murmur of voices. He lay on a blanket in what appeared to be a small cave, the ceiling low and uneven above him. His head throbbed painfully, and his shoulder protested when he tried to move. "He's awake," came Emma's voice from somewhere nearby. Small hands touched his face gently. Solomon blinked, his vision clearing to reveal Emma kneeling beside him, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Emma?" He managed his voice rough. "Are you all right, Jesse?" "We're fine," she assured him, turning to call over her shoulder. "Jesse, he's talking." Footsteps approached, and Jesse appeared kneeling beside his sister. The boy's face was smudged with dirt, but he appeared unharmed. "Dr. Hayes," he said, relief evident in his voice, "you've been out for hours. We thought—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice his fears. Solomon attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. Jesse moved quickly to support him, helping him lean against the cave wall. "The Apache," Solomon said, recalling the warriors who had appeared at the canyon. "They helped us." Jesse nodded. "They're friends of Aunt Rebecca. She lived with them for a while before she went to Europe." This unexpected information registered dimly through Solomon's pain. "Where is she?" "Outside talking with Chief Nahukos," Jesse replied. "They're deciding what to do next." Solomon took stock of his surroundings more carefully. The cave was larger than he had initially thought, extending back into darkness beyond the reach of the small fire. Various supplies were stacked against one wall: blankets, water skins, provisions for a journey. "The documents?" he asked, remembering the metal box Jesse had carried. "Safe," the boy assured him, patting a satchel that hung from his shoulder. "I never actually gave them the real box. That was empty, a decoy Pa made. The real documents are here." He tapped the satchel. Solomon felt a surge of admiration for the boy's courage and quick thinking. "That was brave, Jesse. Foolish, but brave." Jesse ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I couldn't let them hurt you. Not after everything you've done for us." Emma, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly took Solomon's hand in both of hers. "Thomas says you kept your promise," she said solemnly. "He's not angry anymore." The simple statement struck Solomon with unexpected force. Before he could respond, Rebecca entered the cave accompanied by an elderly Apache man, whose deeply lined face spoke of a lifetime of hardship and wisdom. "Dr. Hayes." Rebecca greeted him with evident relief. "I'm glad to see you conscious. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by cavalry," Solomon replied honestly. "But I'll live." He nodded respectfully to the Apache elder. "Thank you for your intervention. I believe I owe you my life." And the old man studied Solomon with penetrating dark eyes. "I am Nahukos," he said in heavily accented but clear English. "Rebecca is as daughter to my people. Her family is our family." He gestured toward Jesse and Emma. "These children carry the blood of their grandfather, who was friend to the Apache. We protect our own." Rebecca moved to Solomon's side, kneeling to examine the wound at his temple. "You need proper medical attention," she observed. "The bleeding has stopped, but there's risk of infection." "I've had worse," Solomon assured her, though the throbbing in his head suggested otherwise. "What happened after I lost consciousness?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "Ward is dead. Ellis, too. The others fled, but they'll return with reinforcements once they reach the fort." "Then we need to move," Solomon concluded, attempting to rise despite the pain. Rebecca placed a restraining hand on his good shoulder. "Not yet. We're safe here for the moment. This cave system is known only to the Apache, and they've posted guards at all approaches." Chief Nahukos nodded confirmation. "No white man will find this place, but by morning you must be gone. The soldiers will search everywhere." "Where will we go?" Jesse asked, voicing the question in all their minds. Rebecca exchanged a glance with the Apache chief before answering. "West, to the territorial capital in Santa Fe first, then on to California as planned." She turned to Solomon. "If you're well enough to travel." Solomon met her gaze, reading the unspoken question there. "I'll manage. But what about Judge Holbrook? He's still in a position of power." "Not for long," Rebecca replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Thomas's documents don't just prove the boundary manipulation. They also detail bribes paid to Holbrook Ellis and Ward complete with dates, amounts, and the names of those who paid them. Evidence that would interest the federal authorities in Santa Fe, Solomon concluded. Rebecca nodded. Exactly. With testimony from us and these papers, Holbrook's conspiracy will collapse. The silver deposits will remain within the Apache reservation as originally intended. Chief Nahukos rose, his movement graceful despite his advanced age. I must prepare my warriors. We will guide you safely to the western trail at dawn. He looked down at Solomon with unexpected compassion. Rest now, healer. Your journey is not yet complete. After the chief had departed, Rebecca busied herself preparing a medicinal tea from herbs provided by the Apache. Jesse and Emma settled beside Solomon, the three of them sharing a quiet moment amidst the uncertainty that still surrounded them. Will you really come with us to Santa Fe? Jesse asked, hope evident in his voice. Solomon considered the question carefully. His ranch lay abandoned, possibly destroyed by now, if Ward's men had returned to search it more thoroughly. His patients in town could seek care elsewhere, at least temporarily. And here beside him were two children who had somehow worked their way into his heart in the span of mere days. Yes, he said finally. At least to Santa Fe. Beyond that, he left the thought unfinished, unwilling to make promises he might not be able to keep. Emma leaned against his uninjured side, her small body warm and trusting. You'll come to San Francisco, too, she stated with the peculiar certainty that characterized her more mystical pronouncements. Thomas says so. Solomon smiled despite himself. Does he now? The little girl nodded solemnly. He says you need to see the ocean, that it helps heal broken hearts. Rebecca returned with the tea, catching the end of Emma's statement. Her expression softened as she handed the steaming cup to Solomon. The child may be right, she said quietly. California is a place for new beginnings. Solomon accepted the tea, inhaling its unfamiliar but not unpleasant aroma. I had a life in New Mexico, he reminded her. Responsibilities. And what of your responsibility to yourself? Rebecca countered gently. To honor the healing your heart requires. The question hung in the air between them unanswered as Solomon sipped the bitter tea. Already he could feel its effects, a slight numbing of the pain, a clearing of his thoughts. You should rest now, Rebecca advised, rising to her feet. We'll leave before first light. As she moved away to continue preparations, Jesse and Emma remained at Solomon's side, a silent but palpable comfort. The boy had taken on the role of protector, his young face serious as he kept watch over both his sister and Solomon. Emma had curled up like a cat, her head resting against Solomon's arm, already drifting toward sleep. Solomon felt a profound sense of connection to these children. A bond formed through shared danger and mutual protection. Whether it was fate, coincidence, or something more mystical that had brought them into his life, he could no longer imagine sending them away with Rebecca without knowing they would be truly safe and happy. The journey ahead would be dangerous. Holbrook's allies would be searching for them, and the evidence they carried threatened powerful men throughout the territory. Yet for the first time in 3 years, Solomon found himself looking forward rather than backward, planning for a future rather than dwelling in the past. As the fire burned low and the cave grew darker, Solomon closed his eyes, allowing the medicinal tea to draw him toward healing sleep. His last conscious thought was of the promise he had made at the graves of his wife and children. Not the promise to find them again, but the simpler, more profound vow to live in a way that would honor their memory. Perhaps, in these 2 orphaned children and their remarkable aunt, he had found the path to keeping that promise at last. Dawn had not yet broken when Rebecca gently shook Solomon awake. The cave was dark, save for a single small lantern, its light carefully shielded to prevent detection from outside. It's time, she whispered. "How do you feel?" Solomon took inventory of his injuries as he sat up. His head still throbbed, but the violent nausea had subsided. His shoulder ached where Ward had struck him, but he could move it, albeit with discomfort. "I'll manage," he assured her, accepting her help to stand. Jesse and Emma were already awake, the boy packing the last of their meager supplies, while his sister rolled the blankets with surprising efficiency for a child her age. Chief Nahukos appeared at the cave entrance, a shadow against the pre-dawn darkness. "We must move now," he said simply. "Soldiers are searching the canyons to the east." They followed the old chief through a series of twisting passages that eventually emerged on the western slope of the canyon, well away from where the confrontation with Ward and Ellis had occurred. 4 Apache warriors waited there with horses, 2 for riding, 2 laden with supplies. "The children will ride with you," Nahukos told Solomon and Rebecca. "My men will guide you to the western trail. From there, you must make your own way to Santa Fe." Rebecca embraced the chief, speaking softly to him in his own language. The old man nodded, then turned to Solomon. "You have a good heart, healer," he said. "The spirits recognized this when they sent the children to you." Solomon, unsure how to respond to this mystical assessment, simply inclined his head in respectful acknowledgement. "Thank you for saving our lives." The chief's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Life has purpose, even when we cannot see it. Your purpose and theirs," he gestured toward Jesse and Emma, "are woven together now like strands in a basket." With these cryptic words, he turned and melted into the darkness, leaving Solomon to ponder their meaning as Rebecca helped the children mount the horses. Emma rode with Rebecca while Jesse joined Solomon sitting before him in the saddle, his small body tense with anticipation and lingering fear. They rode in silence through the pre-dawn darkness, following their Apache guides along hidden trails that wound through the rough terrain. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Solomon caught glimpses of distant dust clouds that suggested military patrols searching the area around Fort Selden. But their small party remained undetected, moving steadily westward toward the main trail to Santa Fe. By mid-morning, they had reached a small stream where their guides indicated they should rest the horses. As the Apache warriors conferred with Rebecca, Solomon took the opportunity to check on the children. Jesse had been unusually quiet during the ride, his usual vigilance subdued by exhaustion. Now he sat beside the stream absently, tossing pebbles into the water. "How are you holding up?" Solomon asked, easing himself down beside the boy. Jesse shrugged. "I'm all right." After a moment, he added, "I've never seen anyone die before. Not up close." Solomon nodded, understanding the source of the boy's subdued mood. "Ward gave you no choice, Jesse. You did what was necessary to protect your sister and yourself." "I didn't shoot him," Jesse pointed out. "That was the Apache." "But you were prepared to face him," Solomon replied. "That took courage." The boy was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "I keep thinking about Pa. He must have been scared too when they came for him and Ma. But he tried to protect us, just like you did." Solomon placed a gentle hand on Jesse's shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you, son. You've honored his memory by protecting Emma and preserving the truth he died for." Jesse looked up, his young face solemn, with a maturity beyond his years. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Solomon assured him. A small smile flickered across Jesse's face, brief but genuine. He picked up another pebble, studying it before tossing it into the stream. "Are you really coming with us to California?" Solomon hesitated the question, forcing him to confront the decision he had been postponing. His life in New Mexico, the ranch, his practice, the connections he had formed seemed distant now, as if belonging to another man in another lifetime. Before he could answer, Emma appeared beside them, her blonde hair glinting in the sunlight. "Of course he is," she stated with her peculiar certainty. "He promised." Solomon raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" Emma nodded seriously. "Not with words, but here." She placed a small hand over her heart. "The same way Papa promised to keep us safe." The simple wisdom of her statement left Solomon momentarily speechless. This child, who spoke with the dead and saw truths hidden from others, had perceived something in him that he had only just begun to acknowledge himself, a commitment that transcended rational decision-making. Rebecca joined them, having concluded her consultation with the Apache guides. "They'll leave us here," she informed them. "The main trail is just beyond that ridge. We should reach it by noon." Solomon nodded, rising stiffly to his feet. "And then, 3 days to Santa Fe if we're not delayed," Rebecca replied. She studied his face, sensing his unresolved thoughts. "You're still deciding whether to continue with us beyond that." It wasn't a question, but Solomon answered anyway. "I had a life here. Patients who depend on me." Rebecca's expression softened with understanding. "You also had a life before the war, before the epidemic that took your family. Lives change, Dr. Hayes. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance." She glanced toward Jessie and Emma, who had moved a short distance away to fill their water skins. "These children have come to depend on you, too. Perhaps even more fundamentally." Solomon followed her gaze, watching as Jessie helped his sister balance on a rock to reach the clearer water at the stream's center. In just days, they had become precious to him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Not replacements for his lost children, but unique souls who had somehow awakened his dormant capacity for connection. "I don't know what awaits in California," he said finally, "for any of us." Rebecca smiled, a genuine warmth replacing her usual reserved demeanor. "None of us do. That's what makes it an adventure rather than merely a journey." The Apache guides departed after a brief farewell, vanishing into the landscape as completely as if they had never existed. Solomon, Rebecca, and the children continued westward, reaching the main trail to Santa Fe by early afternoon. There they joined the steady flow of travelers, traders, settlers, and the occasional military patrol, all moving along the established route to the territorial capital. They adopted the appearance of a family traveling together, a disguise that drew little attention from others on the trail. Rebecca and Solomon presented themselves as sister and brother-in-law, the children their shared responsibility following a family tragedy. It was close enough to the truth to be maintained convincingly, yet different enough to avoid immediate connection to the events at Fort Selden. That evening, as they made camp alongside other travelers at a popular stopping point, Emma approached Solomon as he tended the small fire Rebecca had built. "Will you tell us a story?" she asked, settling beside him with the easy familiarity of a child who has found her place. "Mama used to tell stories before bed." Solomon hesitated, caught off guard by the simple request. "I'm not sure I know any good stories for children." "You could tell us about Thomas and Sarah," she suggested. "Your Thomas and Sarah." The proposal created a curious ache in Solomon's chest, not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but something softer like the tenderness of a healing wound. "Would you like that?" Emma nodded eagerly. Jessie, overhearing from where he was arranging their bedrolls, moved closer, his expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. "All right," Solomon agreed, finding to his surprise that he wanted to share these memories that, speaking of his children to these children, felt right somehow. "Thomas was about your age, Jessie, when we moved to New Mexico Territory. It was just after the war." As Solomon spoke, the stories flowed more easily than he had expected, tales of Thomas's adventures exploring the ranch, Sarah's fascination with the local flora and fauna, family picnics by the creek, and quiet evenings reading by the fire. Jessie and Emma listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions or drawing parallels to their own experiences. Rebecca joined them, eventually sitting slightly apart, but clearly listening. In the firelight, Solomon caught glimpses of emotion crossing her face, sadness, understanding, and something that might have been longing. When the children finally drifted to sleep, Solomon and Rebecca sat in companionable silence, watching the embers of the fire. "Thank you," she said after a while, her voice soft in the darkness, "for sharing your Thomas and Sarah with them. With us." Solomon nodded, surprised to find that the telling had left him not drained, but somehow lightened, as if the memories once shared had transformed from burden to blessing. "Emma believes they're connected somehow," he said, voicing the thought that had lingered unspoken between them. "My children and her and Jessie." Rebecca studied him in the dim light. "And what do you believe, Dr. Hayes?" Solomon considered the question carefully. "I believe that grief can blind us to possibilities, that perhaps the boundaries between souls are not as fixed as we imagine." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I don't know if Emma truly speaks with Thomas, or if it's something else entirely, but I know that these children have awakened something in me that I thought had died with my family." "Hope," Rebecca suggested softly. "Yes," Solomon agreed. "Hope and purpose." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Those are powerful medicines, Doctor, perhaps the most potent healing agents of all." The journey to Santa Fe took 4 days, rather than the anticipated 3 delayed by a spring storm that rendered the trail muddy and treacherous. They arrived at the territorial capital as sunset painted the adobe buildings in hues of gold, and rose the beauty of the scene, a stark contrast to the danger that still pursued them. Rebecca led them to a modest inn on the outskirts of town, away from the government buildings, where Judge Holbrook's influence might be strongest. There they secured rooms and enjoyed their first proper meal in days, a simple but satisfying dinner of beans, tortillas, and stewed meat that the children devoured with evident appreciation. After the meal, as Jessie and Emma settled in their room under Rebecca's watchful eye, Solomon ventured out alone to reconnoiter the town. His injuries had improved enough to allow relatively normal movement, though his shoulders still protested certain motions and his head ached when he was overtired. Santa Fe bustled with activity even in the evening hours, a vibrant mixture of cultures and languages that reflected the territory's complex history. Solomon moved through the streets with deliberate casualness, noting the locations of government offices, telegraph stations, and potential escape routes should they become necessary. As he passed the territorial courthouse, a familiar figure emerged from the main entrance. Judge Holbrook, accompanied by 2 men Solomon didn't recognize. The judge appeared untroubled, laughing at something one of his companions had said, a man confident in his position and unaware of the evidence being assembled against him. Solomon turned away before Holbrook could notice him, pulse quickening with the realization of how vulnerable they remained. The judge's conspiracy extended to the highest levels of territorial government. Presenting their evidence would require careful planning and the right allies. He returned to the inn to find Rebecca waiting in the small sitting room adjacent to their quarters. Her expression told him she had reached similar conclusions during his absence. "We can't simply walk into the federal marshal's office with Thomas's documents," she said without preamble. "Holbrook has too many connections. We need someone we can trust absolutely." Solomon nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Do you have such a person in mind?" "Perhaps." Rebecca leaned forward, lowering her voice, though they were alone. Before my sister married Thomas, our father had a friend, a former judge who now serves as legal counsel to the governor, Judge Nathaniel Harmon. If anyone would stand against Holbrook's corruption, it would be him. Can you arrange a meeting? I believe so, but it would be safer if I went alone. Rebecca held up a hand to forestall his objection. You should remain with the children. If something goes wrong, you'll need to get them out of Santa Fe immediately. Solomon wanted to argue, but recognized the logic of her plan. Very well, but be careful. Holbrook's reach may extend even to the governor's office. Rebecca's smile held grim determination. I've navigated more dangerous waters than these, Dr. Hayes. Trust me. The following morning, Rebecca departed for her meeting, while Solomon remained at the inn with Jesse and Emma. To keep the children occupied and avoid drawing attention, he suggested they remain in their rooms, using the time to continue the education their mother had begun. Jesse proved to have a quick mind for mathematics and geography, while Emma displayed a remarkable memory for poetry and stories. As Solomon guided them through simple lessons, he found himself imagining a future where such teaching might continue, perhaps in a sunlit room in San Francisco, with books and proper materials, rather than makeshift lessons in a rented room. The thought no longer seemed as foreign as it once had. Rebecca returned in the late afternoon, her expression guarded until they were safely behind closed doors. Then her face broke into a relieved smile. Judge Harmon remembers my father well, she reported, and he harbors suspicions about Holbrook already. He's agreed to meet with all of us tonight at his private residence. All of us? Solomon questioned, glancing toward the children. Rebecca nodded. He specifically requested to hear Jesse's account firsthand. As the only witness to his parents' murder, Jesse's testimony strengthens our case considerably. Jesse, who had been listening intently, straightened his shoulders. I can do it, he asserted, though Solomon noted the slight tremor in his voice. I can tell him what happened. I know you can, Solomon assured him, placing a supportive hand on the boy's shoulder. But only if you're certain you're ready. Jesse nodded, his young face set with determination. Pa would want me to tell the truth, to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. That evening, they made their way through the darkening streets to Judge Harmon's residence, a substantial adobe home set back from the road, surrounded by a high wall that provided both privacy and security. Rebecca led them to a side entrance where a servant awaited, clearly expecting their arrival. They were ushered into a well-appointed study, where Judge Nathaniel Harmon rose to greet them. He was older than Solomon had expected, perhaps in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and the erect posture of a man accustomed to command. Rebecca Whitaker, he said warmly, taking her hands in his, you have your father's eyes. Edward would be proud of the woman you've become. Rebecca smiled genuine affection in her expression. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Judge Harmon, especially under these circumstances. Corruption in public office offends me deeply, Harmon replied, his voice hardening. If half of what you've told me about Holbrook is true, he has betrayed everything the law stands for. His gaze shifted to Solomon and the children. And these must be your companions in this dangerous enterprise. After introductions were complete, they settled into the comfortable chairs arranged around Harmon's desk. The judge leaned forward, his manner gentle but direct, as he addressed Jesse. Young man, I understand you witnessed something terrible, something no child should ever see. His voice was kind, but not condescending. Would you be willing to tell me what happened the night your parents died? Jesse glanced at Solomon, who nodded encouragingly. Then the boy began his account haltingly, at first, then with increasing clarity, as the memories took shape in words. He described the men who had come to their homestead, his parents' frantic efforts to hide the children, the gunshots and screams, and finally, the terrible silence that followed. Throughout the telling, Emma held her brother's hand, her small face solemn with shared grief. Solomon watched them both with a mixture of admiration and protective concern, ready to intervene if the recounting became too painful. But Jesse continued steadily to the end, describing how he had retrieved his father's metal box from its hiding place and buried it in the cave before he and Emma were discovered by a passing farmer and taken to the fort. When he finished, Judge Harmon sat in silence for a long moment, his lined face grave with the weight of what he had heard. "Thank you, Jesse," he said finally. "That took great courage." Rebecca produced the metal box from her satchel, placing it on the desk before the judge. "These are Thomas Whitaker's original survey maps and his journal documenting the conspiracy. They prove that Holbrook Captain Ellis and Sheriff Ward deliberately planned to redraw the Apache Reservation boundaries to seize valuable silver deposits." Harmon opened the box, carefully examining its contents with the practiced eye of a legal mind. "This is compelling evidence," he acknowledged after reviewing several documents, especially when combined with Jesse's testimony. "Captain Ellis and Sheriff Ward are dead," Solomon added, "killed during their attempt to recover these documents and silence the children. But Judge Holbrook remains in power, unaware that his co-conspirators have failed." Harmon's expression hardened. Not for much longer. He rose, moving to a cabinet from which he withdrew a decanter and glasses. "This evidence justifies immediate action. I'll present it to the governor first thing tomorrow, along with my recommendation for Holbrook's arrest and prosecution." As he poured a small measure of amber liquid into each glass, he continued, "The silver deposits will remain within the Apache Reservation as originally designated, and the true account of Thomas and Sarah Whitaker's murder will be recorded in territorial court documents." He handed glasses to Solomon and Rebecca, then raised his own in a solemn toast. "To justice, delayed, but not denied." They drank the fiery liquid, burning a path down Solomon's throat. Judge Harmon set down his glass, his expression turning thoughtful. "What will you do now?" he asked, looking between Rebecca and Solomon. "Remaining in the territory could be dangerous even after Holbrook is arrested. He has allies who may seek retribution." "We're continuing to San Francisco," Rebecca replied. "I have a home there large enough for the children to grow up in safety and comfort." Harmon nodded approval, then turned to Solomon. "And you, Dr. Hayes, will you return to your practice in the eastern counties?" Solomon hesitated, aware of Jesse and Emma watching him intently, their expressions a mixture of hope and resignation. Children who had learned too young not to count on permanence. "No," he said finally, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke it. "My work here is finished. I believe my skills could be of use in California." The joy that bloomed on the children's faces confirmed the rightness of his choice. Emma beamed with vindication, as if she had known all along what his decision would be. Perhaps she had. Judge Harmon smiled, perceiving the undercurrents beneath the simple statement. "A wise choice, I think. New beginnings often provide the best healing." They departed Judge Harmon's residence with renewed hope and a clear plan. The judge would move against Holbrook the following morning while they prepared for the journey west. If all went well, they would leave Santa Fe with the knowledge that justice had been served and the children's future secured. As they walked back to the inn, Emma slipped her small hand into Solomon's, a gesture that had become familiar over their days together. "You're really coming with us?" she asked, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to see more than merely his physical presence. "Yes," Solomon confirmed the certainty of his decision, settling comfortably within him. "If your aunt agrees, of course." Rebecca, walking slightly ahead with Jesse, glanced back with a smile that transformed her usually serious face. "I believe That can be arranged, Doctor. Later that night, as the children slept, and the town quieted around them, Solomon stood at the window of their rented room, gazing westward toward the distant mountains that separated them from California. Beyond those peaks lay the ocean. Emma had mentioned the vast healing expanse he had never seen, but had often imagined during the darkest days of his grief. Rebecca joined him at the window, her presence a quiet comfort in the darkness. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. Solomon shook his head. "No, just acknowledging the journey ahead, both the physical distance and the other kind." She nodded understanding. "It won't always be easy. The children carry wounds that may never fully heal, as do we all. But they're not facing those wounds alone anymore," Solomon observed. "None of us are." Rebecca's hand found his in the darkness, a brief touch of connection. "No," she agreed. "We're not alone." In that moment, standing at the threshold of an uncertain future, yet somehow more at peace than he had been in years, Solomon thought of the promise he had buried on that hillside above his ranch, the vow to his dead children that had sustained and haunted him in equal measure. "I will find you again," he had promised. "Wherever you go, I will find you." Perhaps in the mysterious workings of fate or providence, or simple human connection, he had kept that promise after all. Not in the way he had imagined, but in the discovery of new purpose through two children who needed exactly what he had to give. As dawn broke over Santa Fe, painting the adobe buildings in soft golden light, Solomon Hayes stood with Rebecca, Jessie, and Emma on the boarding platform of the Western Stage Line. Their meager possessions were loaded tickets purchased for the first leg of their journey to California. Judge Harmon had sent word that morning Holbrook was in custody, the evidence against him overwhelming. The conspiracy had collapsed, its architects facing justice at last. The Apache reservation boundaries would remain as originally drawn, the silver deposits protected from exploitation. As they prepared to board the waiting stage, Solomon took one final look eastward toward the life he was leaving behind. The grief and isolation of the past 3 years seemed to belong to another man, now a shadow self he had finally outgrown. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, standing beside him with quiet understanding. Solomon nodded, turning toward the stage where Jessie helped Emma climb the high step. "Ready." They settled into the cramped confines of the coach, the children pressing close on either side of Solomon as the driver called to the horses. With a lurch and the crack of a whip, they began moving westward toward the ocean, toward California, toward the future that awaited them all. Emma leaned against Solomon's arm, her voice soft but certain as the stage gathered speed. "We're going home now," she said. "All of us." And Solomon Hayes, Doctor Father, and Keeper of Promises, found that he believed her.